Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something a little less PG scroll through history, and a little more why is everyone in togas and why is that man pouring gold dust on himself? Yeah, we're going deep into the wild S3X lives of ancient emperors, and trust me, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your city and the time you're listening in the comments. I love seeing how many of you are curled up with these stories all over the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, and you've got a full name, a full ego, and a palace full of problems. You also happen to be, the Emperor of Rome. Not bad for someone who started out as a slightly inconvenient heir with a tiger mum and an absent dad. But now you're in charge and the Roman Empire is basically your playground. Or, more accurately, your party venue. Tonight's gathering is no ordinary dinner. Oh no, you're hosting what the Senate will later whisper about as the banquet that smelled of cinnamon and regret. It starts with the golden couches, yes, real gold, and naked dancers painted in glitter. You recline on silken cushions, sipping wine mixed with crushed pearls, while the ceiling of the Domus Aurea, your newly built palace, literally rains rose petals down on your guests. Some people choke on them. You find that funny. You're about 16 years old. Your mother, Agrippina the Younger, made sure you got this job by doing what mothers in powerful Roman families sometimes did: manipulate, eliminate, and maybe poison a few people along the way. She's probably watching from behind a curtain, sipping watered wine and praying you don't embarrass the family name too much. Joke's on her, by the time you're done, the family name will be a cautionary tale for centuries. Now here's the thing about Nero, he didn't start wild. For a brief glimmering moment, people thought you were going to be a good emperor. You listened to advisors, you wrote poetry, you performed in plays. You even outlawed capital punishment for a hot minute. But power is a drug, and you didn't just take a little. You binged it, chased it with sex, and served it on golden plates. The parties become routine, but party is the wrong word. Ritual orgiastic sensory implosion is closer. You develop a thing for spectacle. You once stage a feast that lasts several days, complete with moving banquet tables, rotating dancers, and animal-shaped fountains spraying spiced wine. Guests strip off their clothes as musicians play erotic tunes on lyres. By morning, half of Rome's elite is passed out in your garden, and the other half is mysteriously missing their shoes, dignity, or both. There's also a weird obsession with fire. You love watching it. There are rumours you played music while Rome burned, though historians are split on that. What's clear is that in the aftermath of that massive fire, you take the ruins of the city and build a palace so massive, it has an artificial lake, vineyards, and a 100-foot-tall statue of, you guessed it, you. It's literally called the Golden House. Somewhere in all this madness you find time for love, kind of. You marry Claudia Octavia, but she's too proper, too Roman, too not you. So you send her away, accuse her of adultery with no real evidence, and have her killed. Then you fall for Poppaea Sabina, who's everything Octavia wasn't: ambitious, flirtatious, and dangerous. You love her so much that one day, in a fit of rage, you kick her in the stomach while she's pregnant. She dies. You cry a little, then you move on. Fast forward to the really unhinged part. You meet a boy named Sporus. He's young, delicate, and apparently looks just like your late wife Poppaea. So what do? You castrate him, dress him up in her gowns, call him your wife, throw a public wedding, invite the senators, and yes, you consummate the marriage. Sporus, whose real name no one bothers to remember, becomes the ultimate symbol of Nero's descent into god-complex level narcissism. Historians still debate whether it was madness, grief, or just an emperor unchecked. Probably all three. At the height of your reign, your nights blur into orgies and theatrical performances. Sometimes both. You insist on acting in your own plays, taking centre stage in tragedies you wrote yourself. The audience is legally required to attend and applaud. Some women reportedly give birth during the hours-long performances just to escape. You don't notice, you're too busy sobbing dramatically in costume. Now here's a quirky little footnote for the pillow of your mind. You were convinced that music could heal the soul and raise the dead. You even toyed with the idea of singing people back to life. There's no evidence this worked, but you absolutely made your court musicians practice the same dirge over and over again, just in case. As for scholarly debates, though they'll go on forever. Was Nero a misunderstood artist in the wrong era, a victim of biased historians, or truly Rome's ultimate cautionary tale? Depends on who you ask. Tacitus and Suetonius weren't fans. Modern scholars, though, sometimes point out that his earliest years weren't so bad, but no one denies that by the end, it was less Nero fiddled while Rome burned, and more Nero fiddled with everything and everyone until Rome burned from sheer exhaustion. Your final days are bleak. As conspiracies close in, you flee the city in disguise, hiding in a villa with a handful of loyal servants. When Roman troops come to arrest you, you can't quite go through with killing yourself, so you make your secretary do it. Your last words? What an artist dies in me. Sure, Nero. That's definitely what history will remember. You're standing at the altar now in front of an audience that isn't sure whether to laugh, scream, or start rehearsing funeral dirges. The priest is trying his best to look serious, but even he's blinking slowly like he's stuck in a nightmare. You glance to your left, and there stands Sporus, your bride. He's trembling slightly in his sheer silk-hemmed gown. A golden veil rests atop his shaved head. His makeup is immaculate. His silence, even more so. You are Nero, and you've officially taken the concept of "I miss my wife" and flung it off the edge of Mount Unhinged. This wedding is not a parody. It's not a satire. It's a full-on state-sponsored event. The entire imperial court is invited, and senators, some grey-haired, some hungover, most terrified, sit in stiff silence as you slip a ring onto Sporus's delicate hand. You even throw a banquet afterward, complete with vows, dancing, and toasts to your eternal love. There's no doubt in anyone's mind. You have married their boy as if you were Poppaea reborn. Later that evening, when the wine's flowing and the dancers are writhing around to the beat of something vaguely Dionysian, you make sure Sporus is seated beside you. You call him Sabina. You refer to yourself as his husband. Occasionally you lean in and whisper lines from your own poetry into his ear. He nods, eyes glassy, possibly praying to every Roman god that the ceiling caves in. The court, of course, claps. They toast. They pretend this is all normal. Because what else can they do? You've executed people for less. You burned the bodies of senators you didn't like, and when you were feeling particularly dramatic. You composed songs about their deaths and sang them at parties. But back to Sporus. His story doesn't begin or end with you. That's the twisted part. He was probably just a slave or a minor noble's child, someone insignificant, until you noticed how much he looked like your dead wife. The resemblance haunts you. It excites you. It gives you an idea. And because you're Nero, you follow through on that idea like a sledgehammer through a garden gate. Castrating Sporus was both literal and symbolic. It wasn't just about gender, it was about power. You wanted to mould him into someone he wasn't, into a vision of femininity that could replace what you'd destroyed. And in doing so, you reveal something deeper and darker about yourself. You don't love people. You collect them, transform them, break them down until they're quiet enough to stay. What's bizarre, and this is the part historians love to debate, is that this wasn't the only time you tried it. There are whispers that you later took on the role of bride yourself, that you donned a veil, painted your face and married one of your male lovers in a separate ceremony. This time you played the role of the obedient Roman wife, moaning at the right times, fluttering your lashes, and calling your new husband Lord. Was it performative? Absolutely. Was it unsettlingly genuine? Also yes. And here's where things start to get extra slippery. Ancient Roman sexuality wasn't quite like ours. It wasn't about straight versus gay. It was about dominance versus submission. The man on top, power. The man on the bottom, shame, unless he was a slave, in which case no one cared. But for an emperor to flip those roles, not once but repeatedly, was a big neon middle finger to Rome's entire macho hierarchy. Which leads us to a fun little fringe detail. Nero apparently had a special bridal chamber constructed, complete with perfumed sheets, rose garlands, and golden statues of Venus watching over the bed like mildly judgmental grandmothers. It's said you demanded your lovers address you in the feminine during these intimate sessions, and that you would emerge afterward proclaiming you had felt the pangs of womanhood. The court would laugh nervously, you would not. There's no shortage of gossip about your nighttime hobbies. Suetonius, Rome's messiest historian, accuses you of everything from voyeurism to public fornication in theatres. According to him, you prowled the city at night in disguise, forcing your way into homes and brothels. If true, it's a terrifying mix of roleplay and actual tyranny. If false, well, it still tells us how you were perceived. And let's not forget the actors and musicians who loved them. You were one in your own mind. You filled the palace with young male performers, some trained in music, others trained in, well, other arts. These weren't just lovers, they were mirrors, cast to reflect back your own melodrama. Each encounter became a stage, each night a one-man opera where you played every role and forced your partner to keep up. So where does that leave Sporus? Broken, perhaps, but not forgotten. After your death, he doesn't just disappear into history's dustbin. No, he gets scooped up by yet another Roman emperor, Otho, who also parades him around like a tragic relic. Then he ends up with Vitellius, who has the bright idea to cast Sporus in a public reenactment of Persephone's abduction. The plan? Force Sporus to relive his trauma in front of a laughing crowd before executing him as part of the show. Sporus, having survived Nero, Poppaea's ghost, and whatever passed for therapy back then, takes his own life instead. And here's the real gut punch. There were probably others like Sporus. Boys and girls moulded, renamed, rewritten like clay in the hands of emperors drunk on their own fantasies. You just happened to make it all public. You turned grief into performance, desire into decree, and a wedding into a monument of dysfunction. Today some scholars try to reframe it. They ask, was this an early exploration of gender fluidity? A sign of queerness in high places? Or was it just unchecked power gone full tilt? The debate rages on, but no one denies the core truth. When emperors wield love like a weapon, no one gets out clean, least of all the bride in gold. So now you're stepping onto the deck of what is essentially a floating palace. And not just any palace. This one is covered in marble, trimmed in gold and brimming with musicians, wine-bearers, dancers, and an uncomfortable number of peacocks. You're Caligula, third Roman emperor, and you've decided that regular land-based debauchery just isn't cutting it anymore. No, your pleasures demand motion, water, and something a little more mythological. Welcome to your floating pleasure barges. These aren't boats in the usual sense, they're massive two-story engineering marvels with heated floors, plumbing systems, dining halls, and staterooms larger than most Roman villas. You've had them built to cruise Lake Nemi, a crater lake just outside of Rome. Why Nemi? Because it's secluded, scenic, and sacred to Diana, the goddess of the hunt. Naturally, your idea of honouring her includes orgies and flute solos. The barges are part floating temple, part love hotel, and every time you board, it's like entering a dream, or maybe a fever dream. The ceilings are painted with gods in compromising positions, the furniture is imported and absurdly soft. And every guest is either stunningly attractive, terrified, or both. You wear sheer robes embroidered with phoenixes. Sometimes you don't wear robes at all. Because why not? You're Caligula. You don't believe in limits. And if we're talking about limits, let's talk about what happens on these barges. It's not just sex, though yes, there's plenty of that. It's performance. You mix in poetry, food, myth reenactments, and, on one unforgettable evening, a full play where you play Zeus and make your lover perform as Ganymede, the boy Zeus abducted to be his cupbearer on Mount Olympus. The symbolism is thick. The wine thicker. You're obsessed with being a living muse. You start demanding people refer to you as Jupiter or Divine Caligula. You build a temple to yourself in the palace, complete with a life-size golden statue that you instruct priests to dress daily, just like you. You even rotate your outfits with the statues like you're both attending some cosmic fashion week. The statue gets more attention than some senators' wives. But back to the barges. They aren't all about pleasure. You use them to test loyalty. A guest who refuses an invitation is suspect. A guest who doesn't engage enthusiastically? Dangerous. You've turned pleasure into politics. You're not just seducing Rome, you're dominating it, one silk sheet at a time. Now your reputation is already tattered by this point. The Senate hates you. The people are baffled. You've publicly claimed to sleep with all three of your sisters, Drusilla, Livilla, and Agrippina the Younger, and you parade them around like they are your royal harem. With Drusilla, things seem especially intense. You even treat her as your consort. When she dies, you declare national mourning and order her deified, officially. The Empire now has a goddess named Drusilla. No one's sure what to do with that information. Historians love to argue about whether you really committed incest or if it was all scandalous rumour-mongering by senators with grudges and pens, but here's the thing, it almost doesn't matter. What matters is how power lets you write your own rules. And if you want to turn family into lovers and lovers into gods, no one can really stop you. Not yet. You even go so far as to host orgies where you assign partners like a twisted matchmaker, then watch the encounters unfold like you're judging a dance contest. Sometimes you interrupt, sometimes you join, and sometimes, this is the truly fringe part, you narrate the events in real time, comparing them to scenes from Homer or Virgil. It's literary, it's disturbing, it's very Caligula. There's a story, and yes, we're back in possibly apocryphal territory, where you decide your horse, Incitatus, deserves more dignity than most senators. You give him a marble stall, an ivory manger, and a whole retinue of servants. But then you push the bit further. You make Incitatus a priest, maybe even a consul. Historians still debate how literal that appointment was, but we can all agree it sends a message. If your horse can serve in government, what does that say about your ministers? And that's really what you're doing, isn't it? Using excess and absurdity to control. Every time you humiliate someone publicly, every time you strip off your robes and climb into someone's lap mid-speech, you're reminding them that nothing is sacred. Not family, not status, not the Senate. Only you, only Caligula. The scholarly debates around you are fascinating. Some argue that your madness was exaggerated after your assassination, that the senatorial class, never fans of a populist emperor, amplified the worst rumours to justify your murder. Maybe you weren't actually that wild. Maybe you were just eccentric, dramatic, impulsive. But others say, no, you were every bit the unhinged man-child history portrays. They point to your childhood traumas, your traumatic illnesses, and your proximity to absolute power as ingredients in a catastrophic psychological cocktail. Then there's the weird little detail that your floating palaces, those magnificent Lake Nemi ships, were so advanced that when they were rediscovered in the 20th century, engineers were flawed. Hydraulic lifts, lead piping, bronze anchors. It's like you poured all your resources into making floating Versailles 3 centuries before Versailles was a twinkle in Louis XIV's eye. That's legacy, even if it smells like rose oil and desperation. Your end comes the way these stories often do. The Senate plots, your own guards turn on you. You're stabbed in a corridor, your blood spilling onto the same marble floors you once coated in flower petals. The people breathe easier. The court burns your memory, but your floating dreams linger, half legend, half engineering marvel, all tragedy. Centuries later, your ships will rise from the lake only to be destroyed again, this time by fire during World War II. Maybe that's fitting. Your world wasn't built to last. It was built to burn bright, offend deeply, and vanish spectacularly. And somewhere in the depths of Lake Nemi, maybe there's still a gold goblet or a lyre waiting to be found, a whisper of your parties, a shimmer of your madness. Now you're stepping off the ship and climbing the jagged cliffs of Capri, the sea crashing below, the sky so blue it almost dares you to fall in love with it. But you're not here for the view, you're here for the escape. You are Tiberius, second emperor of Rome, and you've decided that the capital is just too loud, too full of senators, and far too judgmental for your increasingly specific interests. Capri is paradise, at least it starts that way. Your villa, Villa Jovis, is built like a fortress, perched high out of reach with the panoramic views that let you spot trouble before it even thinks about visiting. You're in your 70s now, a deeply private man, worn down by years of politics, betrayal and awkward public ceremonies where everyone pretends not to notice the blood on your toga. You didn't even want to be emperor in the first place, Augustus kind of forced you into it. So now, after years of ruling, you finally say, you know what, let Rome run itself? And somehow, how it kind of does. You still send letters, of course, filled with commands and judgments, but otherwise you're tucked away like a retired god, surrounded by marble and myth and the kind of isolation that lets your demons stretch out and get comfortable. Now, let's talk about the grotto. You've constructed elaborate pleasure gardens, hidden bathhouses and grottos carved into the cliffs. And it's here, according to your biographers, especially the ever-spicy Suetonius, that things get dark. They say you populate your island retreat with young boys and girls, collected like exotic birds dressed in costumes, trained in particular. Talents. You call them your minnows. You supposedly swim with them, play with them, and instruct them in acts that leave modern readers squirming in their chairs. Some accounts claim you have them trained to perform underwater acrobatics of a very adult nature. Others mention specific horrifying routines performed in front of statues of the gods. It's part theatre, part ritual, part, let's just call it what it is, psychological decay. You've blurred the line between indulgence and cruelty so completely that no one around you dares to call it out. You pay these children well, or at least their parents. Some are captives, others volunteers from poor families who see this as an opportunity, twisted as that may seem. You write everything off as art, as religious expression, as imperial privilege. It's the ultimate power trip, shaping desire into law, cloaking exploitation in poetry. And let's not pretend you don't have favourites. There's a boy named Thrasyllus, gifted to you by a provincial governor eager to impress. He sings, dances, and, if the stories are to be believed, never leaves your side. You have artists paint his portrait. You claim he's the reincarnation of Ganymede. The court whispers. No one whispers too loudly. But here's where things get weirder. Despite your perversions, or maybe because of them, you're still obsessively superstitious. You consult astrologers before making any decision. You believe in omens, dreams, and ghosts. Some nights you sit alone, convinced the shade of Augustus is judging you from a storm cloud. You see your own reflection in a bronze bowl and smash it. You mutter about betrayal, poison, and fate. You begin to keep a list. Names of people who displease you, senators, generals, even distant cousins. You send letters to the Senate recommending trials, exile, or worse. They obey. You don't have to lift a finger. Terror, like wine, ages well. And yet, this is the bizarre part. You're also a sharp administrator. Even from Capri, you manage the empire with cold precision. You reform the coinage, stabilise the borders, launch investigations into corruption. Your darkness is compartmentalised. Night belongs to your vices, day to your empire. Now, some scholars push back against the idea of Tiberius as the grotesque monster Suetonius paints. They argue he was smeared by political enemies. After all, Roman historians loved a good scandal. And what's more scandalous than an old man surrounded by pleasure slaves in a cliffside villa? There's even debate about the so-called minnows. Maybe it was a slur, metaphor, a distortion. Maybe the truth was less pornographic and more pitiful. A lonely, paranoid ruler seeking human contact in the most dysfunctional ways imaginable. Still, the stories persist. That you trained parrots to say obscene things, that you watched executions as foreplay, that you drank a potion made from ox gall and pearls, convinced it would restore your virility. A fringe theory claims you once leapt naked into a freezing pool after hallucinating snakes in your bed. And this was considered a good day. Capri becomes more prison than paradise over time. You're increasingly isolated. Letters from Rome turn sour. People mock you behind your back, calling you Capri's goat. You pretend not to hear, but you do. Oh, you absolutely do. And speaking of goats, there's that myth. The truly grotesque fringe tale where you train a goat to participate in your fantasies. Most historians reject it as sheer slander. Too absurd, even for Rome. But the fact that someone even made it up speaks volumes about your reputation. You die in that villa, surrounded not by friends or family, but by shadows and suspicion. Some say your successor Caligula smothers you with a pillow. Others claim you simply passed in your sleep, worn out by age and isolation. Either way, Rome breathes a little easier. Your body is returned to the capital, burned, buried, erased. The Senate debates damnatio memoriae, erasing your name from every monument, but settles for cold remembrance. You're remembered not as the man who stabilised Rome's economy or secured its provinces, but as the emperor who swam with minnows and whispered madness into the night wind. And maybe, just maybe, as the sun sets on Capri, there's still the ghost of your villa clinging to the cliffs, a breeze that carries laughter, or screams, or both. The scent hits first, sandalwood, wine, and something floral, like lilies crushed under silk slippers. You're back in Rome now, and the golden twilight is bleeding through the palace windows. The air inside shimmers with incense and tension. You are Domitian, Emperor of Rome, and while most of the city sees you as the brooding, paranoid micromanager with a fetish for order, your nights paint a much stranger picture. See, you have a type. And by type, we mean you're obsessed with blondes. Not just any blondes, tall, pale northern imports with flaxen hair and expressions that suggest they are equal parts confused and terrified. You've handpicked a private troop of them. Courtesans, servants, dancers, spies. A small army of golden-haired women known among the staff as Domitian's Daughters of the Dawn. It's very poetic. It's also very weird. They live in the palace, cloaked in silk and silk, trained in music and seduction. At night you summon them one by one or in groups, sometimes for pleasure, sometimes for interrogation, which, in your twisted interpretation of law enforcement, can mean anything from seductive questioning to elaborate, candlelit roleplay about state conspiracies. If you're thinking this sounds like a fever dream with a Senate-sized ego problem at the helm, you're not wrong. But why the obsession with blondes? Some say it goes back to your childhood, to a nursemaid from Gaul who sang you lullabies and brushed your hair with fingers that smelled like wild honey. Others think it's simpler. You're just playing out a Nordic fantasy fueled by too much wine, too much boredom, and a simmering hatred for the Roman elite. After all, most senators aren't blonde. Maybe that's the point. Your wife, Domitia Longina, is aware. How could she not be? She plays the role of imperial consort during the day, all grace and nobility, but behind closed doors, she walks the marble halls like a ghost in mourning. You dismissed her once, publicly, and took her back when it became politically inconvenient to be seen alone. She's smart, she stays quiet, but her eyes follow you like daggers. You've also converted part of the palace into what you call your moon room. It's entirely covered in silver leaf, with polished walls that reflect firelight like starlight. The floor is cold, black marble veined with quartz, and in the centre, a low circular bed surrounded by columns, each carved with the erotic scenes from a myth. You like to bring your golden squad here and pretend you're Jupiter descending from the sky. Sometimes you wear a silver mask. Sometimes you make them wear yours. There are stories, naturally. One senator's wife claimed she was forced to watch her own niece dance nude while Domitian, wearing only a lion's pelt, recited lines from Homer with a goblet of wine in one hand and a whip in the other. Another rumour suggests you built a hidden room within the palace, just to observe visitors through peepholes, tracking their movements like prey. Paranoia doesn't sleep, and neither, it seems, do you. And here's a fringe fact that makes things even more unsettling. You have a thing for punishment. Not just state-sanctioned, but theatrical. You once executed a court musician by crucifixion. Not because he committed treason, but because he looked at one of your favourite courtesans for too long. You called it disrespect. The rest of the court called it a warning. You also talk to statues, and specifically the bust of your late brother Titus, which you keep in a private alcove beside your bedroom. Sometimes, after the palace has quieted and your last blonde companion has slipped away, you kneel before it. You whisper to it, apologise maybe, accuse. It's never clear. But the servants who pass by late at night swear they hear you say things like, "You stole their love. I gave them fear." And that's really what defines you, isn't it? Fear. You rule with an iron jaw and a bruised ego. You obsess over loyalty, over plots, over the Zord's smallest hint of sarcasm. You once had a man executed for joking that a comet meant a change in leadership. Another time you banned philosophers from Rome entirely. Too much thinking, you said. Too many questions. Still, your reign isn't all shadows, doors and silk. You repair the city, sponsor public games, even ban castration in a rare flash of progressive policy. The people love the bread and circuses, but the senators? They grit their teeth every time you smile. Which brings us to the scholarly debate. Was Domitian truly a monster? Or just a misunderstood control freak with abandonment issues? Some modern historians argue you weren't nearly as cruel as the senatorial class claimed. After all, it's their writings that dominate the narrative, and they had every reason to paint you as depraved. Maybe the blonde squad was exaggerated. Maybe the moon room was just a luxurious bedroom with good lighting. But even if only half the rumours are true, you still weren't hosting Bible study sessions. Then there's the story of your death. You suspect something's coming. You've been having dreams, blackbirds, falling stars, a broken mirror. You ask your astrologer for a reading. He says nothing, just blinks and pretends to be studying a scroll. You know betrayal is close and so you start pacing the halls at night, sword in hand, refusing to sleep in the same room twice. But it happens anyway. One morning, as you bend to read a petition, a servant stabs you. Others join in. You fight, bleeding, reaching for your sword, slipping on the polished floor. You die choking on your own fury, staring into the eyes of the man who once toasted your reign. The Senate celebrates. The blonde squad disappears. Domitia weeps, but no one knows if it's for love, relief, or something else entirely. Your memory is officially damned, statues smashed, names scraped from inscriptions, the moonroom sealed. And yet centuries later, when archaeologists dig through the ruins of the Flavian palace, they find traces of silver leaf, echoes of candlelight, and faintly whispers of golden hair in a city built on marble and secrets. You're standing on a hill in the heart of the empire, your sandals crunching lightly over crushed marble and scattered petals as the wind tugs at your toga. You're not Roman, not really, not in the traditional sense. You're Hadrian, Emperor of Rome, but also philosopher, poet, traveller, and builder of walls that stretch across continents. You're the type of man who recites Sappho while inspecting fortifications, who scribbles Greek verse in the margins of legal decrees. You love symmetry, order, and beauty. And when it comes to beauty, there is one form that rises above all others in your mind, the boy. His name is Antinous. You meet him in Bithynia, a Greek province on the eastern edge of the empire. He's quiet, hauntingly handsome, barely into his teens. There's something mythic about him, like he stepped out of a Hellenistic painting and into your life. His hair curls just so. His body, lithe and graceful, moves like a shadow underwater. You see him and everything else seems to blur. This isn't a passing fancy. This isn't court flirtation. This is something deeper, something dangerous. You take him with you, everywhere. And so begins one of history's most obsessive imperial love affairs. You're not subtle. You have him trained in music, philosophy, and hunting. He's educated like a noble, dressed like a prince, and adored like a god. The court raises eyebrows, but no one dares question you directly. Not when you're emperor. Instead, they whisper. They call him your pet, your muse, your shadow. Some mock, others envy, a few just watch, quietly calculating how long it'll last. You travel together through Greece, Asia Minor, and Egypt. Antinous rarely speaks in public. He's not a political figure. He's not even officially your concubine. He's simply always there, by your side at ceremonies, beside you during sacrifices, in your tent when the stars rise. You commission busts of him, have painters capture his profile, write verses that, while never naming him, leave little to the imagination. One of them ends with the line, "I am his and he is mine." In Egypt, something changes. Your tent's haunted. There are rumours of omens, of disturbing dreams, and a creeping fear of mortality that's taken hold of you. You consult priests, you study the stars. You drink more than usual, and Antinous watches, quietly, always quietly. Then on the Nile, in the shadow of the god Osiris, Antinous dies. Drowns, they say. Accidentally, they say. But no one really believes that. He was young, healthy, a strong swimmer. The boat was steady, the water calm, which leaves only darker possibilities. Suicide, sacrifice, murder, theories fly like ash. Some say he gave his life willingly to prolong yours, a mystical offering to the gods. Others claim you had him killed in a ritual, though even your enemies can't explain why. There's even a whisper that he chose to die because he felt his youth slipping away, and he couldn't bear to fade in your eyes. You are shattered. You don't weep publicly, that's not your way. But what follows is one of the most excessive, obsessive responses to grief ever recorded. You have Antinous deified, literally turned into a god. Shrines rise across the empire, in Rome, Athens, Egypt. You rename an entire city after him. Antinopolis. Statues are commissioned, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Antinous becomes an eternal youth, preserved in marble with that same serene expression, that same soft jaw, those immortal curls. Your grief becomes religion. You even start a cult in his name. Festivals are held in Antinous' honour. Prayers are offered to him. People seek his blessings. And the strangest part, it sticks. His worship spreads. For decades, even centuries after your death, there are people lighting candles to Antinous, asking favours from a god born out of a love that Rome never really knew how to categorise. Now, the scholarly debates go wild here. Some argue your love for Antinous was purely platonic, a philosophical admiration for youthful beauty in the Greek tradition. Others scoff and point to the very physical art that decorates your villas, and then there's the camp that sees the whole thing as political theatre, a way to mask loneliness and project divine favour during a turbulent reign. But all the theories crumble a little when faced with the rawness of your reaction. You didn't just mourn him, you immortalised him. You filled the world with his image so thoroughly that even modern historians can't talk about you without invoking his name. You became the emperor who built walls across Britain and temples to a boy who drowned in the Nile. And here's a quirky fringe detail that almost always gets buried under the marble drama. You supposedly once tried to model a new planetary calendar around Antinous' death, aligning festivals with astrological symbols connected to his spirit. The idea didn't stick, but it shows just how far you were willing to go. He wasn't just your lover, he was your axis. After Antinous, your behaviour becomes stranger. You withdraw, you stop attending some ceremonies, your poetry darkens. You build a massive villa, Hadrian's Villa in Tivoli, so vast it mimics entire cities. It includes an artificial canal to mimic the Nile, complete with a small temple to, you guessed it, Antinous. Visitors get lost in its corridors, you roam it like a ghost. Your death comes years later, quiet and unspectacular. By then you've arranged for your ashes to be placed in a grand tomb, but it's the statues of Antinous that survive longer. In fact, of all Roman figures, only the emperators and the gods get as many representations in art as your beloved boy. And that really is your legacy. Not the laws you passed, not the territories you secured, but the face of a boy you loved so deeply you reshaped history around him. His silence echoes through your story like a haunting melody. And whether he was a victim, a sacrifice, or a willing god in the making, no one can deny this. You loved him loudly. Monuments don't lie. The silk is clinging to your hips, the incense smoke curling around your bare shoulders like fingers from another world. You are Elagabalus, Emperor of Rome, High Priest of the sun god Elagabal, and walking, talking chaos in a gilded chariot. You're 14 years old, newly arrived from Syria, and absolutely not here to play by anyone's rules. The Senate is horrified. The people are confused. The court, they're just trying to keep up. Your name isn't even Elagabalus yet, it's Varius Avitus Bassianus, but that changes quickly. You bring your god with you to Rome literally, in the form of a massive black meteorite, which you declare to be the physical embodiment of Elagabal. You build a temple for it, place it on a pedestal, and make sure everyone knows this is the real god now. Jupiter, out. Traditional Roman religion, meh. The sun is the new hot thing and you are his anointed mouthpiece. But worship isn't the only thing you bring with you. You bring heat glitter, gender-fluid sensuality that knocks Rome off its marble pedestal. You wear robes one day and a breastplate the next. You line your eyes with kohl, perfume your hair with frankincense, and host ceremonies where you dance before the sacred stone like a desert priestess channeling cosmic fire. You also marry, a lot, to both women and men. First you take a highborn Vestal virgin, something no one has done before and lived to brag about. Rome is scandalized. The Vestals are sacred, untouchable, meant to remain celibate for 30 years. You not only marry her, you claim it's a divine union between your god and hers. You parade her through the streets like a goddess reborn. People throw flowers, people faint, people scream into pillows, and then you divorce her and marry another, then another. At some point, the line between marriage and spectacle completely dissolves. You're not forming alliances, you're throwing drag balls with vows attached. But your most infamous union isn't with a woman at all. It's with a man named Heracles, a blonde-haired, green-eyed charioteer whose muscles ripple like a Greek statue come to life. You fall for him hard, not just behind closed doors. Publicly, you call him your husband, you insist on being his wife. You refer to yourself in the feminine, call him Dominus, and sometimes demand he strike you when you're out of line, which in your court might mean mispronouncing a prayer or wearing last week's colour. Rome doesn't have a box to put this in. Senators flinch when you enter a room. Generals avoid eye contact. You once hold a banquet where you appear wearing only a sheer golden veil and announce that you are, in fact, seeking a surgeon who can give you a woman's anatomy. Whether it's a metaphor, a misunderstood ritual, or something far more modern than Rome can process, historians still debate. Some say you were the first transgender ruler in history, living authentically despite the empire's horror. Others think it was performance art, but to you none of that matters. You're not trying to define yourself, you're trying to burn yourself into the stars, and you throw parties like no one else. You carpet palace floors in rose petals, scatter emeralds into fountains just for the sound they make, and serve dishes that are more riddle than food, like roast ostrich stuffed with pearls. Guests arrive in fear and leave drunk, confused, and sometimes missing an eyebrow. One time, you invite nobles to a feast, seat them on cushions filled with air and slowly deflate them during the meal. Half of them end up on the floor. You think it's hilarious. The senators do not. And then there's the palace lottery. Oh yes, you're a generous host. You shower your guests with gifts announced by trumpet fanfare and silk scrolls handed out by nude attendants. But the prizes? Wildly unpredictable. One man receives a villa, another a dead dog. Someone else gets a dozen fly swatters. Once, a senator is handed a collection of exotic snakes. Alive, no cage. You laugh until you cry. He screams until he faints. There are whispers that you cell night with yourself to men in the palace baths dressed in gold chains and perfumed oils. That you keep a guest book of your clients ranked by performance. That you appoint ministers based on their bedroom skills instead of their resumes. Some of this may be exaggerated, but the fact that people believe it says everything about your reign. And here's a strange fringe detail. You once fill a banquet hall ceiling with rose petals, thousands upon thousands, then release them mid-dinner. It's meant to be sensual, luxurious, divine. But the petals fall too fast, too heavy. A few guests suffocate. It's ruled an accident. You're still laughing about it days later. Scholars continue to debate who you really were. Were you a queer icon centuries ahead of your time? A deviant child thrust into godhood too soon? A religious revolutionary trying to rebuild the empire in the image of your Eastern god? All three? The sources are messy, some written long after your death, dripping with bias, especially from those who had reason to paint you as Rome's glittering disaster. But none of that saves you. Your own grandmother, Julia Maesa, the same one who helped make you emperor, turns against you when the senators beg for her help. She sees the writing on the wall. You're too unpredictable, too dangerous to the political machine. She replaces you with your cousin, Alexander Severus, a nice boring boy with a taste for order. The coup is quick. You're assassinated in your own palace, just 18 years old. Dragged through the streets with your mother. Your body tossed into the Tiber. Your statues shattered. Your name, like so many before you, erased from official memory. But not completely. Because today, in the dusty corners of history, you shine. Scholars revisit your life with fresh eyes. Artists paint you as a queer saint, and poets whisper your name like a curse and a blessing. And somewhere in the ruins of your temple to Elgabal, the sun still rises over Rome. Bold, radiant, and unashamed. You're hiding in a rolled-up carpet. Not a metaphor, an actual carpet. It's thick, richly woven, probably smells faintly of wine and old papyrus, and you're curled inside it like a cat with a political death wish. Outside, the guards are pacing. Your heart is pounding. You're Cleopatra Philopator, Queen of Egypt, last of the Ptolemies, daughter of incestuous dynasties and divine expectations, and you're about to pull off one of the greatest seduction power plays in world history. Julius Caesar is upstairs. Rome has arrived in Alexandria like an uninvited house guest with legions, and you're already locked in a civil war with your brother/husband, which is, yes, exactly as awkward as it sounds. You've been ousted from your palace, your city's on the edge, and now Caesar, Rome's walking ego with a receding hairline and a habit of collecting queens, is here to settle the dispute. So what do? You get smuggled into the palace inside a rug. Technically, it's a sack of linen, but rug sounds better. And let's be honest, that's how everyone remembers it. One of your loyal servants rolls you up like a particularly valuable shipment of sass and strategy, and hauls you through the gates under cover of darkness. You're delivered directly to Caesar's private chambers, and when the sack is unrolled, there you are, dishevelled, radiant, all smoky eyes and practiced desperation. It works. Caesar is stunned. You're 21, brilliant, charismatic, and fluent in at least 7 languages. He's middle-aged, powerful, and frankly, not used to women who talk back in Greek while quoting Homer. But you don't just want him to admire you, you want him to need you. You make yourself indispensable, wrapping your intellect around his ego like a silk scarf. One night turns into many. By morning, he's no longer a neutral party in Egypt's civil war. You sleep together, obviously, but this isn't just lust, it's theatre. Every sigh, every whispered promise is calculated. You wear your finest robes, not Roman stolas, but gauzy Egyptian silks that cling in all the right places. You douse yourself in rare perfumes, myrrh, cinnamon, lotus, When you speak, you modulate your voice like a song. Cleopatra doesn't flirt, she orchestrates. And Caesar? He's hooked. You dine together surrounded by torchlighter and singing girls, figs dipped in honey and gold plates that reflect your smile. You show him your city, your temples, your vast knowledge of the stars. You speak of Isis and Osiris, the Nile floods and ancient magic. He's never seen anything like you. Rome doesn't have anything like you. Eventually your enemies push back. Your brother Ptolemy XIII tries to oust you for good. So Caesar steps in. There's a siege, fires break out. The legendary Library of Alexandria takes a hit. But in the end, Ptolemy drowns in the Nile, and you're restored to the throne. Not alone, of course. You're now officially co-ruling with another younger brother, because that's just how the Ptolemies roll. But you're also carrying something else, Caesar's child. You give birth to a boy named Caesarion, or Little Caesar, because subtlety is for people with fewer kingdoms at stake. You declare him your heir, and publicly insist he's Caesar's son. Rome doesn't take that well. Back in the capital, Caesar has a wife, several enemies, and now an Egyptian mistress with a royal baby? That's a recipe for political dynamite. Still, Caesar doesn't abandon you. He brings you to Rome. You arrive like an empress from a different planet, dressed in foreign finery, accompanied by servants, speaking with an accent and gliding through marble halls like a living goddess. The Roman elite is scandalized. Caesar sets up a golden statue of you in the Temple of Venus Genetrix. That doesn't help. You don't blend in, you refuse to blend in. You're Cleopatra, descended from the gods, ruler of the Nile, and suddenly the symbol of everything Rome fears about the East. Wealth, femininity, power that doesn't apologize. Behind every fan flutter and gentle smile is a woman who's survived poison plots, sibling betrayals, and now the Senate's scorn. And then Caesar is murdered. Et tu, brute, knives in the Senate, blood on the floor. Rome collapses into chaos, and you're stuck in a foreign city with a child no one wants to claim. So you vanish. Back to Alexandria, back to your throne, back to the careful dance of power and politics and poison. But the real question lingers. Was it love? Scholars argue endlessly about that. Was your relationship with Caesar a genuine romance, or pure politics? Was he seduced by your beauty, or your mind? Maybe both, maybe neither. What we do know is this: you didn't survive by being anyone's pet. You used your intellect and your body as tools in a world that gave women almost no leverage, and you used them well. And here's a quirky fringe fact. Legend says you once bet Caesar that you could host the most expensive meal in history. You crushed a priceless pearl in vinegar and drank it. Technically you won. That pearl would be worth millions today. That's not just excess. That's a mic drop in ancient currency. After Caesar's death, you'll have more lovers, more intrigue. You'll climb even higher. But that first carpet roll into destiny, that was the moment you stopped being just a queen and became a legend. Somewhere deep in the ruins of Alexandria, there's still a story echoing through the dust. A girl in silk, rising from a rug, smiling at the most powerful man in the world, like she already owns his empire. Because maybe she did. You're standing on a balcony with a wine goblet in one hand, the other wrapped around the waist of the most famous woman in the known world. Below, Alexandria glows with torchlight, the harbour alive with ships and shadows. You are Mark Antony, Roman general, war hero, party legend, and right now, you're not just drunk on imported Falernian wine, you're drunk on her, Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, a walking contradiction in gold and silk who could destroy a man's empire with a glance, and has. You've seen it happen. That rug trick. You've heard the story. You wish you'd thought of it first. It started out like strategy. You were in Tarsus trying to sort out Egypt's loyalty while the Roman Republic trembled under the weight of assassins, debts, and too many egos. She arrives on a barge so extra it would make Nero weep with envy. Sails of purple, oars of silver. Cleopatra herself dressed as the goddess Isis, reclining beneath a golden canopy, fanned by boys dressed like cupids. You don't stand a chance. You think you're there to interrogate her. She walks off the boat and starts rewriting the script before you've even opened your mouth. Within hours, you're eating with her, drinking with her around her, quoting poetry while she feeds you figs from her fingers. That's it, you're done. A career Roman politician, veteran of brutal wars, and now you're letting this woman pour wine into your mouth while you lie on cushions like a spoiled Etruscan prince. But this isn't just lust. Oh no, Cleopatra knows the game. You want Egypt's wealth? She'll let you think it was your idea, you want a queen. She'll be that, you want a goddess. Give her a few hours and a costume change. She doesn't seduce you with her body, though sure that helps. She seduces you with empire. Soon you abandon Rome's cold marble and chainmail politics for Egypt's velvet shadows. You follow her back to Alexandria, and what begins as an affair turns into a way of life. You become her consort, her co-ruler, her public equal. She bears you children, twins, and then another son. You name them with imperial flair: Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, the sun and moon. Your love becomes a myth in real time, and oh, the parties. You two form something called the Inimitable Livers. Yes, that's the real name. It's an elite drinking club dedicated to outdoing itself nightly in extravagance. The two of you host feasts where entire tables are edible. You throw masquerades where guests have to dress as gods or animals. You once pretend to be beggars, disguising yourselves in rags, roaming the streets of Alexandria, knocking on doors to see who'll invite you in. When no one does, you laugh and invite the entire street to a feast the next day as punishment. Cleopatra thinks it's hilarious. You do too. But there's a dark side creeping in. Back in Rome, your political rival Octavian, Caesar's heir, dull but terrifyingly efficient, is not amused. To him, your love life is treason. He sees your relationship with Cleopatra as a direct threat to Roman values. Too Eastern, too foreign, too sensual. He starts a propaganda war. He tells the Roman people you've gone native, that Cleopatra has bewitched you, that you've handed Roman provinces to your Egyptian mistress, that you're raising her son to replace Caesar's heir. You don't care. Not really. You're busy. Cleopatra's throne room has become your war room. You wear Egyptian robes now. You host councils where you and Cleopatra sit side by side, gods among mortals. You mint coins with both your faces. It's not a secret, it's a statement. But the Romans, they don't like statements that smell like perfume and look like power sharing with a woman. They want you back in a tunic, not lounging in silk on the Nile. Still, there's this belief between you two, that love can outrun politics, that passion can outmaneuver power, that your personal alliance can become a literal East-West empire. You're wrong, but gods, you commit to the illusion. War comes. Octavian doesn't just attack you, he attacks your identity. He brands you a traitor, says you've promised to move the capital to Alexandria. He claims Cleopatra's seduced you into betraying your own people. And in the final act, as your armies meet his at Actium, everything falls apart. The sea turns red. Your fleet is defeated. Some of your ships catch fire. Others defect. Cleopatra flees early, and you follow. It's a disaster. In one day, the future you built, those nights of wine, the children, the dreams of empire, burn. You return to Alexandria, the world shrinking. The walls of your palace feel tighter. The gold heavier. You've failed. But Cleopatra, she still has her pride, her strategy. She hides her wealth. She secures her children. She prepares her tomb. You try to regroup to fight back, but it's no use. Octavian invades Egypt. He's calm, deliberate, a machine in a toga. He doesn't want you tried or exiled. He wants you humiliated. So you do what Romans do when the last curtain falls. You throw yourself on your sword. Except, and here's the embarrassing part, you botch it. You don't die instantly. You lie bleeding, gasping, eyes wild. Your men, panicked, carry you to Cleopatra. She receives you in her mausoleum, already dressed in mourning. You see her one last time. You say something, though no one remembers the words. You die in her arms. She outlives you by a few days, maybe. Some say she poisoned herself. Some say it was an asp. Some whisper that Octavian killed her quietly. But the legend that she held a serpent to her breast and kissed it like a lover is too good not to keep. Your love becomes legend, tragedy soaked in perfume, the final breath of two people who dared to turn passion into politics. And here's the strange fringe fact. In Rome, they held a triumph to celebrate your defeat. A parade with statues of Cleopatra in chains. A golden effigy of you stabbed through the heart. But in Alexandria, there were still candles lit for the goddess and her fallen Roman consort, for a while, until even the Nile forgot your names. Still, centuries later, lovers toast to you, writers weep over you, and somewhere under the silt of the Alexandrian harbour, your palace sleeps, beneath the wine-dark sea you once ruled, hand in hand with the last queen of Egypt. You sit perfectly still in your polished marble study, quill poised, lips tight, eyes watching Rome through a veil of calculation. You are Augustus, Imperator Caesar Divi Filius Augustus, Rome's first true emperor, the man who took a republic, gently asphyxiated it with a smile, and replaced it with something smoother, shinier, more controlled. You're a master of perception, a sculptor of public opinion, and perhaps history's greatest PR strategist. But under that serene facade, there's heat, there's contradiction, there's vice, and a burning need to control not just the empire's borders, but its bedrooms. You've built your image on moral purity. You promote marriage, fidelity, virtue. You pass laws penalising adultery and rewarding childbearing. You personally attend the weddings of young nobles to encourage decency. You commission statues of gods in wholesome family groupings and flood the streets with messages about returning to old Roman values. You're basically the emperor of family values memes. It's all a little much, but behind closed doors, let's just say the toga comes off pretty fast. Your enemies call you a hypocrite. Even your own daughter Julia rolls her eyes at your moral laws, then breaks them with an almost artistic flair. She becomes a scandal unto herself, conducting affairs with poets, senators, soldiers. You exile her, not because you don't love her, but because people are watching. You've declared Rome to be a city of virtue. You can't have your own daughter sleeping her way through the forum like a Dionysian-themed parade float. And Julia is a problem because she is, in many ways, just like you, clever, charming, dangerous in silk. But unlike you, she doesn't hide her desires behind poetry and marble statues. She flaunts them. You, however, are more subtle. Your rumoured mistresses come and go quietly. Some are highborn widows, others musicians, dancers, even priestesses. You enjoy their company, but you never let them near the political stage. You're too careful for that. You learned from Julius Caesar's mistakes. No foreign queens, no scandalous public affairs. You want to be admired, not whispered about. Still, the whispers come. There's the accusation that you kept a private team of exotic talent for your personal enjoyment, young men and women trained in various arts. The Roman poet Ovid, who eventually gets himself exiled, jokes that your so-called Palatine purity is more of a theatre act than a moral code. He even hints that you watch certain rituals for pleasure, cloaked under the excuse of religious observance. You exile him too. That's kind of your thing, exile the inconvenient. Julia, Ovid, sometimes lovers of lovers. You never kill outright, not unless absolutely necessary, but you erase, quietly, efficiently, like a parent disappointed, not angry. And somehow that's worse. But let's talk about your wife, Livia. Oh, Livia, she's your iron-souled queen, your forever partner in statecraft. You love her, admire her, maybe even fear her a little. She's statuesque, disciplined, elegant, and terrifyingly competent. You never divorce her, despite the fact that she bears you no children. That's rare in Rome, where women are routinely swapped out for better breeding potential. But Livia, she stays. She's your co-conspirator, your quiet storm. There are whispers, of course there are, that she poisoned everyone who stood in your or your son's path to power, but no proof, no confession. Just perfectly timed deaths. You're a strange couple, she's icy control, you're warm manipulation. Together, you redefine the imperial household as sacred, divine. You push this image relentlessly. You call yourself Princeps, the first citizen, pretending you're not actually a monarch. You claim to restore the Republic even as you dismantle it. It's all performance, and it works. But there's a wrinkle, an awkward flesh and blood reminder that the public image you've built isn't quite real. Your sex life, for instance, is not nearly as restrained as your marble busts suggest. There's a quirky fringe rumour, passed around in late-night taverns and dusty senator memoirs, that you preferred older women for affairs, that you thought they were more skilled, more interesting. One source claims you once joked that a well-aged woman is like a well-aged amphora of wine. No one knows if it's true, but it is fun to imagine you whispering that at a party and Livia giving you a look sharp enough to cut marble. And then there's your art collection. You keep statues of naked deities and erotic paintings in a private gallery, tucked deep within your estate. You call it a study in aesthetics, but really, it's your escape hatch, a place where you can take off the emperor mask and just be a man who enjoys pleasure. Here's the ongoing scholarly debate. Were you truly the moral guardian you claim to be? Or were you just another master of hypocrisy, using public virtue to disguise private indulgence? Some historians dismiss you. They say you genuinely believed in restoring Rome's values, that your personal lapses were minor compared to the chaos before your reign. Others call you a slick manipulator who used morality as a leash on the public while keeping your own leash loose and silken. But the truth is probably both. You were brilliant. Strategic, capable of enormous restraint and occasional indulgence. You weren't a hedonist like Nero or Caligula. You weren't a romantic like Antony. You were something scarier. Controlled. You knew when to feast and when to fast, when to smile and when to disappear someone. And your legacy, it lasts. Rome becomes an empire under your rule. Your cult of personality endures for centuries. Statues of you stand long after the emperors who follow you crumble into satire. You become the gold standard by which all rulers are measured. But no matter how many temples are built in your name, the shadow remains. The daughter you exiled, the lover you didn't name, the edicts about virtue that you didn't always follow. You wanted Rome to be moral, yes, but on your terms. And when history asks whether you lived by your own rules, the answer is, when convenient. Somewhere in your private scrolls, buried under poems and state decrees, there's probably a line that reads, "Appear pure, indulge discreetly, rule always." And you did. Steam clings to your skin as you step into the massive hall, your bare feet echoing against polished marble tiles slick with moisture. The scent in the air is part jasmine, part oil, part something human and musky and timeless. You are Caracalla, Emperor of Rome, and today you're not here for politics. You're here to bathe. And by bathe, you don't just mean washing off grime, you mean soaking in imperial excess, basking in architecture that makes gods feel underdressed, and watching your empire shimmer through hot water and rising mist. The baths of Caracalla aren't just baths, they're your legacy. One of them anyway. You've had them built on a scale so enormous that even elephants would feel a little small in the caldarium. There's a gymnasium, libraries, gardens, art galleries and fountains. There's even a whisper chamber where sound carries across vast distances with eerie clarity, which makes for some awkward conversations when people think no one's listening. But the main attraction, the frigidarium and caldarium, the cold and hot pools, each more lavish than most temples. You designed it this way for a reason. The Roman bathhouse isn't just where people clean themselves, it's where they gossip, plot, flirt, scheme, and in your case, recruit. You walk through the halls like a god inspecting his temple. The walls are covered in coloured marble, the ceilings painted with stars, and statues of Apollo and Hercules flank the doorways like silent bouncers. Everyone, nobles, merchants, soldiers, glances up as you pass. You're Caracalla, son of Septimius Severus, slayer of rivals, survivor of fratricide. You rule with a glare and a short temper, but in here you rule differently. In here you seduce. Your reputation isn't subtle. The court knows you have a taste for the youthful and the muscular. Your guards, selected for both loyalty and jawlines, are chosen as much for appearance as combat skill. You treat them well, gold bracelets, fine food, private quarters, and in return they guard your body and, in quieter moments, entertain it. There's one boy in particular that the palace gossips can't stop whispering about. A young Greek athlete, broad-shouldered and sharp-eyed, pulled from the games and placed directly into your personal retinue. He trains with you, eats with you, travels with you. Some nights he emerges from your private bath chamber after hours with damp curls and a look of someone who's been thoroughly instructed. But here's the thing, Rome at this point doesn't blink. You're not the first emperor to blur lines. You won't be the last. What they do resent, however, is your attitude. You don't charm the Senate, you spit at it. You don't tolerate opposition, you execute it. You make yourself equal parts ruler and predator. And the people love you or fear you, often both at once. And then there's your other obsession, Alexander the Great. You're not just a fanboy. You model your entire life after him. You style your beard like his. You wear Macedonian garb. You dream of Eastern conquest. You believe in reincarnation and hint, not so subtly, that you might be Alexander reborn. You even organise pilgrimages to Alexandria to visit his tomb, and there's a rumour, likely false but irresistible, that you try to steal his body to bring it back to Rome. Some say your interest in Greek boys, especially military-age ones, is all part of the same fantasy. You're playing Alexander over and over again in the world's most elaborate role play. Here's a quirky fringe fact that somehow got preserved in a few dusty scrolls. Supposedly, you once hosted a private bathhouse symposium, half philosophical salon, half sex party, where everyone had to dress as Greek deities and debate love while lounging in warm water. You played Achilles, your favourite guard, Patroclus. It ended, predictably, with poetry, wine, and people losing their laurel crowns in the steam. But while you're bathing and pretending to be divine, your real empire simmers. You pass the Constitutio Antoniniana, granting Roman citizenship to every free male in the empire. On paper, that's generous. In practice, it's a tax move. The provinces are expected to give more, not get more. Still, it makes you wildly popular outside Rome. Soldiers adore you. Provincial governors fear you. Senators hate your guts, and they should, because you have a habit of solving political problems with a sword. You killed your own brother, Geta, in front of their mother, right in the palace. You claimed he was plotting against you, which, let's be honest, he probably was. But then you purged anyone who ever spoke Geta's name. Thousands executed, names erased, statues smashed. You tried to wipe him from history like a stubborn stain on your legacy. That makes the bathhouse a strange contradiction, a space of sensuality, relaxation and danger. People come to see and be seen, but if you're there, they also come to kneel, to please, or to disappear. There are stories of lovers who rejected you once. They're never seen again. One scholar who mocked your Alexander obsession was invited to the baths. He never came out. Some said he slipped on the tile. Others say he slipped politically. And here's where scholars start fighting. Was Caracalla the worst of Rome's emperors, or just another product of its system? Some defend you as efficient, even visionary. After all, you stabilised the army, expanded citizenship, and kept the empire mostly intact. Others point to the massacres, the tyranny, the vanity, the body count. You're a human contradiction, violent yet indulgent, philosophical yet petty. You die the way you lived, fast and bloody, assassinated while relieving yourself on the side of a road. Not exactly the heroic end you imagined, but fitting in a grim Roman sort of way. The man who wanted to be Alexander the Great falls not on a battlefield, but behind a bush, stabbed by a disgruntled soldier. The baths of Caracalla remain. Long after your statues are defaced, long after your memory is condemned, the marble halls still stand. Cracked, yes, and weathered by time, but undeniably grand. Visitors centuries later will marvel at the scale, the acoustics, the beauty, and whisper about what might have happened in the steam. Somewhere your name still echoes through that hot, humid air. Half command, half seduction, equal parts emperor and ghost, you tighten the leather straps around your wrists. Flex your arms until the veins rise like rivulets across your skin, and step into the arena. Not as a spectator, not even as a host, but as the main attraction. You are Commodus, Emperor of Rome, son of Marcus Aurelius, yes, the Stoic philosopher king. And you've decided that being worshipped as a living god just isn't enough. You want blood, you want spectacle, and most of all, you want people to scream your name not out of fear, but adoration, lust. Or you want to be Rome's gladiator emperor. This is not your average imperial hobby. Emperors collect art, not kill prisoners for fun, but you, Commodus, have always been a little different. Even as a boy, you were unpredictable, moody, gorgeous too, with golden curls and soft, pouty lips that made every sculptor swoon. You learned to smirk before you could walk. You liked knives more than scrolls, and while your father tried to mould you into a philosopher king, you were mostly interested in seeing how much wine you could drink before falling off the couch. Now you're grown and your tastes have matured, barely. You take over after your father dies, and almost immediately you begin transforming the imperial court into your personal stage. You rename Rome Colonia Commodiana. You erect statues of yourself dressed as Hercules. Lion skin draped over your muscular chest, club in hand. You don't just rule Rome, you are Rome. Or so you say. Anyone who disagrees mysteriously vanishes, usually after attending one of your private dinner discussions. And your knights? Oh, your knights are legendary. You keep a revolving cast of courtesans, male and female alike, but you don't call them lovers. You call them audience. They don't sleep with you, they witness you. You perform for them, dances, monologues, flexing routines that would make a marble statue blush. You've turned seduction into theatre and yourself into the star attraction. You bathe in oils, wear golden thigh chains, and sometimes enter your bedchamber dressed as Mercury, complete with winged sandals and nothing else. Your palace becomes a carnival of desire and power. Eunuchs in silk tunics serve spiced wine from alabaster jars. Exotic dancers perform on mirrored floors. You host dinner parties where courses are themed after your gladiatorial victories. Boar roasted with spears sticking out of it. Blood-red sauces poured onto silver plates shaped like shields. You love the symbolism. You love yourself more. And then, of course, there are the gladiator games. You don't just sit in the imperial box, that's for cowards. You step into the sand dressed in armour, specially forged to show off your muscles. The crowd roars. You don't fight trained gladiators though, at least not often. You prefer injured ones, or animals already wounded, or criminals with no experience. You kill them anyway, dramatically, efficiently, with a flourish at the end. You declare yourself the 615th champion of the arena. No one corrects you. No one dares. You charge the city enormous sums for the games, and then collect even more in appearance fees. For yourself, from the treasury. You're literally paying yourself to entertain yourself in front of the public, and honestly so. No one's sure if it's genius or madness. Possibly both. And here's a fringe fact that manages to survive in the dusty corners of Roman history. You once had your favourite male lover dress as an Amazon warrior, complete with bow and quiver, and together you staged a hunt in the imperial gardens. You played Hercules, of course. At the climax of the performance, you fake wrestled him into the fountain and declared him tamed. The entire court watched. They clapped. Some cried. A few resigned on the spot. You were also obsessed with your physical image. You posed for statues constantly, usually with your foot on a severed head or wild beast. Artists were instructed to idealize you to divine proportions, bigger muscles, clearer jawline, divine aura. One sculptor dared to give you a slightly crooked nose. He was found dead in the Tiber 3 days later, apparently drunk and clumsy. Now, scholars have spent centuries trying to figure you out. Were you a megalomaniac? A narcissist? A traumatized child trying to fill your father's sandals by turning the entire empire into a colosseum? Some point to early signs of instability. Others note that you were born into impossible expectations. Marcus Aurelius wasn't just a ruler, he was a philosopher, a saint practically. And you were the after party. But maybe the most unnerving theory is the simplest. You were bored. You had absolute power, a perfect body, unlimited resources, and no desire to sit in dusty rooms arguing about tax reform. So you gave Rome what it really wanted: entertainment. You were their bread and circus, their living, breathing, oiled-up god of war and lust, and you didn't care who you destroyed to keep the show going. You executed senators who criticized your games. You fed enemies to lions, then wrote odes about it. You turned the Senate House into a theatre and forced them to attend your divine readings, which were basically you monologuing about your greatness, while they tried not to pass out from boredom and fear. But of course, every show ends. Your inner circle begins to plot. You've pushed too far, raised taxes, murdered allies, and insisted on renaming the months after your various titles. Yes, you really tried to replace August with Commodus. One of your mistresses, Marcia, who once whispered poems into your ear, becomes the centre of the conspiracy. Along with your chamberlain and a wrestler/bathing partner, they poison your food. It doesn't work so fast enough, so your own wrestler strangles you in the bath. Rome wakes up the next day to silence. No more games. No more golden Hercules. The Senate declares your memory cursed. Your statues are torn down, your name scrubbed from monuments. A whisper campaign begins to rewrite your reign as an embarrassing, decadent fever dream. But even now your image lingers, in broken mosaics, in sculpted torsos without heads, in the whispered stories of emperors who perform their power instead of merely wielding it. You were Commodus, gladiator, lover, tyrant, and for a brief, shining, blood-soaked moment, you made Rome scream your name. The palace smells like sandalwood and sweat, and tonight the stars are hanging unusually low over Chang'an. You are Emperor Wu of the Han Dynasty, martial ruler, son of heaven, and the man who believes deeply, truly, that sex might just be the key to immortality. Not metaphorically, not poetically, literally. You're not here just to rule China, you're here to transcend death. And to do that, you're going to need a lot of mystics. And even more concubines. It begins with an obsession, not with power, that's already yours, but with the idea that the body contains cosmic energy, life force, chi. If you master it, you don't just stay healthy, you live forever, or long enough to become more myth than man. Your scholars scour the empire for alchemists and Taoist sages. You fund entire institutes devoted to mapping the paths of energy through the body. And let's just say, those paths lead to some very interesting bedroom experiments. Your inner palace swells with women, hundreds, possibly thousands, selected for their beauty, yes, but more importantly for their youth, balance of yin energy, and potential to extend your own life through carefully choreographed acts of intimacy. You're not just sleeping with them, you're absorbing their energy. So the theory goes, some concubines are rotated by the season, some are assigned to you based on the alignment of the stars. Others are chosen because a particularly persuasive alchemist once told you that girl born during solar eclipse equals double vitality. One such girl becomes your favourite. She's called Wei Zifu, soft-spoken, graceful, clever. She started as a singer in your sister's household. You meet her once and suddenly she's not just a concubine, she's elevated to empress. And yet even she can't keep your attention for long. Not with immortality on the line. You follow strict regimens, avoid certain foods, perform nightly rituals. You wear talismans around your neck and ingest pills made from gold, mercury and crushed jade. Yes, mercury. Your court physicians warn you. You nod thoughtfully and then wash it down with wine anyway. Your Taoist advisors teach you the doctrine of Fang Zhongshu, the bedchamber arts. These aren't just tips for better sex. They're considered part of statecraft. The emperor's health is the nation's health. The way you move in bed could affect rainfall, harvests and earthquakes. No pressure. One text claims the emperor must not release his essence in order to preserve his yang energy. So you perfect the art of delayed climax, or at least you try to. Some nights go better than others. There are scrolls filled with diagrams, angles and poetic metaphors that make the Kama Sutra look like a beginner's manual. Positions named after animals, constellations, natural phenomena. You approach each night as both performance and experiment. And your lovers? They are not passive. You encourage them to learn the arts too. Some are trained in music, some in poetry, but many are trained in breathing techniques, eye contact rituals, and energy transfer exercises that involve a lot of eye contact and even more incense. The palace becomes a sacred laboratory of intimacy. You believe that by joining with the right combination of yin energy, at the right time in the right lunar cycle, you might reverse aging, transcend mortality, become celestial. The rest of the court? They're a mix of fascinated and horrified. Your policies are inconsistent, sometimes brilliant, sometimes dictated by what your favourite astrologer said after a weird dream. You launch ambitious campaigns, expand the Silk Road, develop state monopolies, and then pour imperial funds into finding islands of immortality in the Eastern Sea. You send expeditions to find sages said to be over 500 years old. They never return. You assume they've found paradise and decided not to come back. Your subjects are confused. Is this man a god? A genius? A delusional old perv with too many alchemists in his ear? Here's the quirky fringe detail. One of your physicians supposedly crafts a bed with copper coils and crystal inlays, claiming it can realign the emperor's energies during intercourse. You try it once and claim to have seen the face of a dragon goddess in the steam rising from your own skin. The bed mysteriously disappears shortly after, likely dismantled and sold on the black market to ambitious minor nobles hoping for a similar glimpse of divinity. Not all is pleasure though. You're a harsh ruler capable of paranoia, cruelty and suspicion. You order purges, you execute your own son under suspicion of rebellion. Your later years are marked by isolation and erratic policies. Some say it's the mercury, others say it's the burden of trying to keep heaven's mandate with aging bones and a mind fraying at the edges. Your scholarly reputation is divisive. Historians argue over how seriously to take your spiritual pursuits. Were you pioneering new medical theories, or just chasing Taoist dreams like a horny philosopher king? Some say your emphasis on health, sex, and spiritual alignment influenced traditional Chinese medicine for centuries. Others say you were just rich and bored and deeply, deeply afraid of dying. And your concubines? The archives record some by name, but most vanish into history's haze. Thousands of women lived their lives orbiting your bed, reduced to data points in ledgers, to birth dates and lunar alignments. But a few left traces, poems, rumours, jade hairpins buried with titles they never earned. Empresses of the night, brief queens of your quest for eternal fire. Eventually, the end comes. Your body, despite the jade, despite the sex, despite the rituals and powders and late-night breathing games, fails. You don't become a god, you become an ancestor. Your tomb is grand, guarded by stone creatures and buried dreams, but your obsession, it lingers. In Taoist texts, in the margins of scrolls that survive dynastic collapse, your name appears over and over again beside symbols for energy, desire, and longevity. The emperor who tried to cheat death by sleeping his way past it. The man who believed the bed was a temple, and pleasure a kind of prayer. And tonight, as the mist curls over Chang'an and the palace halls stand silent, there are still scholars tracing the patterns of qi through the human body and wondering, did Emperor Wu get close? You rise each morning not to a lover's kiss or courtly greetings, but to the soft scrape of silk slippers on tile and the sound of servants lowering themselves to the floor in absolute silence. You are Wu Zetian, Empress of the Tang Dynasty, former concubine, former nun, former imperial secretary, and now, finally, China's sole female emperor. Not consort, not regent, emperor. And your bed, like your throne, is yours to rule. They didn't see you coming, the men, the ministers, the generations of rigid Confucian hierarchy. When you first entered the palace as a concubine to Emperor Taizong, you were just another pretty girl, one of many. Pretty, yes, but that wasn't your weapon. Your mind was. You memorized poems while others preened. You listened at banquets, even when ignored. You watched, waited, and when Taizong died and the other concubines were sent to Buddhist convents, you were supposed to vanish quietly into monastic obscurity. Instead, you made your move. You returned to the palace and seduced Taizong's son, Emperor Gaozong, your late husband's heir. Scandalous, absolutely, smart, brilliant, and he fell hard. You didn't just become his consort, you became his closest advisor, his political partner, and eventually his puppet master. When illness left him blind and bedridden, you took over state affairs. When he died, you pushed aside your own sons and declared yourself the sacred and divine Empress Regnant, a title no woman had ever held, a position no man would ever give you. So you took it, and once in power you did what emperors do. You built a court that reflected your will, including your tastes. Your imperial bedroom was a fortress of secrets and silk, golden incense burners shaped like dragons, screens painted with phoenixes, pillows stuffed with crushed herbs said to stir the blood and clear the mind. It was here that you indulged in pleasures as strategic as they were personal. And among your most whispered about indulgences, the Zhang brothers, Zhang Yizhi and Zhang Changzong, handsome, charming, talented in poetry, music, and all the other arts that mattered in your chamber. They were brothers by blood and, according to your critics, by a shared appointment to your bed. You plucked them from obscurity, raised them to power, gave them robes, titles, estates, and slept with them both, or perhaps took turns, or both at once. The records are hazy, deliberately so. The point is, they supped you, body and soul. This arrangement scandalized the Confucian moralists, of course. A woman with lovers, a woman with two lovers, a woman who didn't pretend to hide them behind carved screens and moonlit metaphors. They didn't even know what to do with that level of unrepentant power. But you didn't care. You weren't trying to fit into their model of virtue. You were redrawing it. The Zhang brothers weren't your first dalliances either. During your years as consort and later Empress Dowager, you surrounded yourself with men chosen for their looks, their elegance, their discretion. Court records make note of several low-ranking officials who mysteriously found themselves promoted after private meetings in your quarters. Coincidence? Please. And your lovers weren't just playthings, they were pawns, tools, weapons. In a court crawling with eunuchs, spies, and enemies wearing smiles, you needed allies you could trust, men who owed you everything and who slept too deeply to betray you. The palace became a game board, and you played it with silk gloves and sharp nails. Here's a fringe story that survives in less than official texts. You once held a midnight competition in your private garden where poets, musicians, bourgeois, and dancers performed for you by lantern light. The prize? A night in your chamber and a jade token that meant immunity from court prosecution for a year. It's impossible to verify, but scholars agree something like it could have happened. After all, your reign was full of theatre, ritual, and sensual control. You also changed the role of women in court, not just as passive beauties, but as advisors, administrators, even spies. You elevated female scholars, You commissioned female historians. You redefined the role of empress from ceremonial ornament to political force. You weren't just seducing men, you were dismantling the whole patriarchal scaffolding and doing it with crimson lips and perfectly inked calligraphy. But power has a price. Your court becomes a maze of paranoia. Assassinations, whisper campaigns, betrayals from your own children. You rule through surveillance and strategy, knowing every move could be your last. You keep your lovers close but your enemies closer, often inviting both to the same banquet and watching them squirm over fermented crab and imperial wine. And your sons? Let's just say your mothering style leaned more Machiavelli than bedtime stories. You deposed one, poisoned another, and raised another just long enough to use him as a puppet until he too proved unworthy. The idea that motherhood makes women soft. You buried that idea next to the rivals you outlived. Here's the open scholarly debate. Was your rule a moment of radical female empowerment, or a brutal dictatorship wrapped in jasmine and silk? Some modern historians hail you as a feminist icon centuries ahead of her time. Others point to the executions, the manipulation, the endless web of control and say, no, she was just another tyrant. She just happened to be a woman. The truth, of course, is both. You were a tyrant and a revolutionary. A lover of poetry and poison, a ruler whose bed was as much a throne as your gilded seat in the Hall of Supreme Harmony. Eventually your grip loosens. Age creeps in, enemies circle. You are deposed by your own son, the same one you once treated like a pawn. Your lovers are executed. The Zhang brothers are dragged from the palace and slaughtered. You retreat to a private palace, more respected than beloved, more feared than mourned. But your name remains. Wu Zetian, the only female emperor in Chinese history. A woman who ruled not from behind a curtain, but from the centre of the storm. Who chose her lovers like she chose her ministers, with purpose. Who wrote her own epitaph? None. You left your tombstone blank. Let the future decide your story, and it has. Some call you a seductress, others a sovereign. Most agree you were something the world had never seen before. A woman who turned her bed into a battlefield, her lovers into symbols, and her legacy into a monument of impossible ambition. You sit cross-legged on a tatami mat, sunlight slipping through wooden shutters and golden stripes as the clatter of a distant shamisen echoes faintly across the imperial gardens. You are Emperor Meiji, the man who dragged Japan from feudal slumber into the sharp electric sting of modernity. But beneath the polished reforms, the steam engines and stitched military uniforms, there is another rhythm in your life, one slower, warmer, and more ancient. A rhythm that plays out behind screens and under silk sheets. Japan is changing, you've decreed it. The samurai are becoming civil servants. The isolationist walls of the Edo period have cracked wide open, and in rush the inventions, diplomats, diseases, and decadence of the West. Your court is no longer just fans and fans and fans, but typewriters, rifles, and debates about railroads. Still, in the hush of the inner palace, behind the Meiji Constitution and all its clean clauses, the old ways survive, in lace lingerie imported from Paris, in the soft rustle of silken robes being undone by hands that have memorized you. Your imperial harem, politely called the uku, though under you it shifts form and flavour, is a place both sacred and sensual. You're officially married to Empress Shoken, a woman of intelligence, grace and restrained ambition. She is your official consort, your diplomatic partner, and she lives her life with spine-straight dignity and the patience of a bonsai master. She bears no children, but your lineage does not wither, because beyond the Empress you have concubines, many. 15 officially recognised, dozens more drifting in and out of palace records like fading brushstrokes. They are called the Nyobo, women selected from noble families, trained in court manners, poetry and the subtleties of pleasing an emperor who wears western boots by day and slips into brocade by night. They are not scandalous, not shameful. They are tradition. They are duty. They are the wombs of the empire. And from these women your dynasty grows. 15 children survive from these unions. Boys and girls, the most famous of which is your son and eventual heir Yoshihito, born to your concubine Yanagihara Naruko. The women themselves are not paraded, not flaunted. Their role is quiet, private, steeped in old codes of discretion. But behind the painted screens there is warmth, conversation, intimacy. You are not cold, you are not cruel, you are, in your own soft-spoken way, romantic. You write poems for them. Waka, composed at dawn or after rainstorms, comparing your concubine's size to the wind rustling through bamboo. Some of them return the favour. One concubine, known for her wit as much as her beauty, once teased you in verse about your tendency to fall asleep mid-embrace, or you laughed. Genuinely. The court scribes, of course, did not record that part, and here's the strange soft truth: you cared, for most of them anyway. You knew their voices, their preferences, their strengths and fears. You weren't Nero or Caligula, tossing lovers aside like broken vases. You kept relationships alive, even as new ones were arranged. Your palace was not a brothel. It was more like a constellation, each star its own quiet flicker of affection, loyalty, and the occasional carefully controlled jealousy. But don't mistake this for weakness. You were emperor. And even in love, your word was absolute. When one concubine's family attempted to leverage her closeness to you for political gain, you had them removed, gently but permanently, from court. Another concubine who fell in love with a low-ranking court official was exiled to a countryside villa, where she lived out her days painting birds and pretending she had no regrets. You modernised everything else, dress, industry, whole leisure, but your bed remained feudal, in the most curated and ceremonial way. Western diplomats, when they caught wind of the concubine system, were baffled. Some were scandalised, others intrigued. A British attaché once wrote in his private letters that he would give up Parliament for a week in your slippers. The French were less subtle. They offered perfumes, gowns, and scandalous massages for your ladies, which your advisors burned immediately. Though not before one concubine apparently kept a tiny glass bottle of Chanel No. 5 tucked in her kimono for the rest of her life. And the scholarly debate? It's layered. Some historians see your private life as a contradiction. How could the architect of modern Japan still cling to the concubine system, a relic of a rigid, hierarchical past? Others argue that your relationships were less about sex and more about lineage preservation and ritualized care. After all, you didn't flaunt your affairs. You didn't turn the court into a theatre of lust. You kept your pleasure private, even as the empire exploded with steam and steel. But here's the quirky detail that rarely makes the textbooks. You were apparently ticklish, painfully so, and one concubine, in a moment of rebellion, once used that to get her way. She wanted her younger sister elevated to lady-in-waiting. You refused, so she climbed onto your lap, kissed your ear, and ran her fingers along your ribs until you shouted her name loud enough for the guards to flinch. The next day, her sister was given a place in court. No one asked questions. In your later years, you slowed. You spent more time with your concubines in gardens, sipping tea, writing poetry about clouds and death. You began limiting new additions to the harem, not out of reform, but fatigue. You'd seen too much. The world was changing too fast. You were no longer a man dancing between eras. You were the era, and it was slipping quietly behind you. When you died in 1912, the imperial harem effectively ended. The age of concubines was over. Your son, awkward, sickly, modernised, would not maintain the tradition. The screens came down, the ink dried. The women faded back into the shadows of history, remembered in footnotes and funeral records, if at all. But in some quiet archive in Kyoto, a faded diary remains. One written by a former concubine, filled with poems, pressed flowers, and delicate sketches of a man with tired eyes and warm hands. She never calls you emperor, only him. And maybe, in that small way, you're still alive. Not in statues or railroads or warships, but in the soft pages of someone who knew you not as Meiji the Reformer, but as the man who whispered love in verse and let his heart live behind the screen. The night smells like jasmine, spice, and something thick and heady. Opium, maybe, or memory. You're lounging under a silver-leafed pavilion in the middle of a moonlit garden, barefoot, veiled in silk, your fingers stained with henna and wine. You are Emperor Jahangir, ruler of the Mughal Empire, son of Akbar the Great, husband of Nur Jahan, yes, that Nur Jahan, and self-declared connoisseur of pleasure, poetry, and occasionally poison. Jahangir means world Caesar, and you wear the name like perfume, indulgently, arrogantly, and without apology. You were born into opulence, raised on mangoes, battle reports, and Persian couplets. Your father Akbar ruled with discipline and intellect. You, on the other hand, rule like a man who once wandered into a dream and decided to set up court there. While Akbar marched armies across the subcontinent, You build gardens, sketch birds of war, and pen long, florid memoirs that read like a blend of royal diary and late-night confessional. And when it comes to pleasure, you don't dabble, you curate. Your harem is vast, not just in number, but in style. Persian beauties with almond eyes and sharp wit. Rajput princesses who wear their bangles like weapons. Kashmiri poets who recite verse under your mosquito-netted canopy, as musicians play soft ragas in the background. The women of your court aren't passive figures. Many of them are artists, thinkers, spies. Some rule over parts of the household like queens of their own tiny realms. You encourage it. You like your lovers smart. But there's only one woman who truly reigns over your heart, and that's Nur Jahan. She's not your first wife, but she's the only one who matters. She enters your life as a widow, graceful, clever, unafraid to meet your gaze, and you fall like a tree in monsoon season. With her, it isn't just sex or companionship. It's surrender. She becomes your partner in governance, your co-ruler in everything but name. You stamp coins with her name. You let her issue royal decrees. She appears in court alongside you, dressed in embroidered silks, eyes lined in kohl, voice calm and absolute. Nur Jahan is more than a lover. She is a force. And while other emperors might hide their affections behind curtains and concubine codes, you hold her hand in public. Let her ride beside you on elephant back. Let her speak in council meetings, her voice smooth and measured, while courtiers shift uncomfortably in their seats. You don't care. You've seen empires rise and fall, though. You know what matters, and right now what matters is her. Still, your appetite for pleasure extends beyond romance. You are quite famously an opium lover. You take it in the mornings, in the evenings, sometimes with wine, sometimes instead of food. It calms your nerves, lets you drift into that shimmering half-reality where your gardens bloom larger, your women move more slowly, your poems become sweeter. You write about it in your memoirs. You don't even try to hide it. Today I took 2 grains of opium, recited a verse by Hafez, and was filled with joy, you casually note, as if joy were a thing you could measure by the spoonful. Your palace reflects this haze of beauty. Fountains ripple softly into marble pools. Carpets are so plush they swallow footsteps. Mirrors inlaid with jade and ivory reflect dancing flames at every turn. Women move like music through the corridors, some holding trays of sweetmeats, others carrying messages, others simply wandering, lost in their own layers of silk. You once commission a bed shaped like a lotus, its petals gilded, its centre filled with rosewater-scented cushions. One concubine says lying in it feels like being inside a painting. You laugh and call her your muse for the evening. And here's a strange little fringe detail for you. According to one Persian court chronicler, you once tried to get a portrait made of your favourite parrot. Not just a painting, but a full royal portrait, complete with velvet robes and miniature jewellery. When the artist hesitated, you raised an eyebrow and simply said, "He repeats my words better than most nobles." Your love of animals is famous. You keep menageries filled with cheetahs, peacocks, snow leopards. You have names for them all. One of your wives reportedly has her own miniature zoo. And you sometimes visit her quarters just to feed sugar cubes to her pet deer while she sings to you under her breath. But not everything is perfume and poetry. You can be violent, volatile. You once ordered a man skinned alive for plotting treason. Another time you sentenced a noble to death, then changed your mind mid-execution and pardoned him with a wave, just to watch how fast emotions could shift in one man's face. You are emperor, after all. Your moods are the weather, and no one brings an umbrella. Still, the court dances around you. Your pleasure is their survival, your moods their omens. Here's where historians split. Some see you as a decadent monarch, too stoned to rule, leaving Nur Jahan to do all the work. Others argue that you were sharp when you wanted to be, that you used your indulgence as a veil, a strategy, a way to distract enemies while consolidating power behind the garden walls. And maybe they're both right. Maybe you were a man of contradictions, a philosopher with a soft addiction, a lover with a violent temper, a poet king who believed in beauty so deeply that he let it dictate policy. You were no soldier, but you conquered through charm. You ruled not by fear, but by seduction. You didn't yell, you smiled. You quoted Rumi while banishing a rival, and when you died, peacefully, surprisingly, you left behind not just children and monuments, but memories of moonlit dances in the zenana, of lovers singing lullabies, of wine cups tipping over onto maps of the empire. The world remembers you as the emperor who let love rule. And in the middle of that legacy stands Nur Jahan, unbent, unbowed, unforgettable, because if you were the sigh, she was the breath. The sun filters through lace-draped windows, illuminating the golden threads of your bedding like sunbeams trapped in fabric. You don't stir yet. Someone else is already drawing back the curtains, laying out your slippers, arranging your wigs, brushing the collars of your morning gown. You are Louis XIV, the Sun King, le Roi Soleil, and your day doesn't begin with a groggy shuffle toward coffee. It begins with a ceremony, a literal one. It's called the lever, and it's where your bedroom becomes your throne room. Courtiers crowd the edges of the chamber, jostling for the honour of helping you put on your stockings. Nobles squabble over who gets to hold your mirror. Dukes wait nervously for the chance to hand you your sword. Your morning erection is less a private matter and more of a symbol of royal vigour everyone notices. No one mentions it. Versailles doesn't run on gears or money. It runs on your body, your moods, your affections. And you, Louis, understand this better than anyone. You rule from your bed, literally. Most of your major political decisions are made here, reclining against velvet cushions while men in powdered wigs stammer their proposals and women in hoop skirts pretend not to glance at the slit in your robe. You've made your bedroom the centre of the French universe, not just of power, but of pleasure. You've turned it into a sacred space of performance, indulgence, and calculation. Your sexual appetite is well known and well fed. You're not shy about lovers. You have official mistresses, maîtresses en titre, installed in apartments just steps from your own. They receive guests, hold salons, even wield political influence. Everyone knows who's warming your bed and everyone wants to be next in line. Because to be desired by Louis is to be powerful. There's Louise de la Vallière, your first great love, shy and sweet, who eventually retires to a convent. There's Madame de Montespan, fiery, witty, scandalous, and mother to several of your children. You build her secret doors and assign her official titles, all while discreetly moving in your new favourite, Madame de Maintenon, who manages to turn your courtly lust into something almost domesticated. Maintenon's the odd one out, your unofficial wife, your spiritual balm. She's not known for her beauty, but for her intelligence. And by the time you reach your 50s, it's her voice you hear most often in your bedchamber, reading to you from scripture, while your courtiers pretend not to notice the slow decline of your legendary virility. But in your prime, you were unstoppable. You bed women as easily as you fund wars, and it's not just about lust, it's about performance. Seduction is an extension of politics. If you desire someone, it means they're important. If you ignore them, they may as well disappear. So you cultivate desire like a gardener. You send notes, glances, invitations to after-hours musicales. You give gifts, perfumed gloves, diamond hairpins, lapdogs with matching collars. And when you've tired of someone, you don't scold them. You simply stop looking their way. The court follows suit. Versailles, your gleaming monstrosity of a palace, is both an architectural wonder and a monument to sexual power dynamics. Rooms are built to encourage secrecy and voyeurism. Behind each gilded mirror, there might be a spy, a jealous lover, a bored noble trying to catch a glimpse of something scandalous. The court buzzes constantly with rumours. Who entered your bedroom at midnight? Whose scarf was seen hanging from your doorknob? Which chambermaid left weeping? There's a quirky fringe detail that gets passed around in history nerd circles. Supposedly, you once had your furniture rearranged so that your lovers would always have to walk toward you in the most flattering light possible. Another rumour, that you insisted your mistresses bathe in milk to maintain the softness of their skin, whether that was for aesthetic reasons or personal preference. No one's quite sure, but either way, the milk bill was outrageous. You also have children, many children, some legitimate, most not. You recognise the important ones, elevate them, marry them off like chess pieces, but parenting is more symbolic than emotional for you. You're the father of France after all. Your literal offspring are just footnotes in your broader mission as to make your reign eternal. Now let's talk scholarly debates. Some historians argue that your endless string of affairs was a distraction from your more brutal policies, that while you were lounging in lace with Montespan, the Edict of Nantes was being revoked and thousands of Protestants were fleeing the country. Others say your sexuality was weaponized, another way to consolidate power, reward loyalty, and keep the nobility scrambling for your approval. Was it love, lust, or simply a strategy refined to perfection? Probably all three. You were a master of appearances. You knew how to make even the most depraved things seem sacred. You turned desire into ceremony, made your passions part of statecraft. While other monarchs hid their affairs behind closed doors, you flung those doors wide open, held a mirror to the world and said, "Look how divine I am." And yet, beneath the gold and gossip, there was always that slight simmering loneliness. When Maintenon reads to you by candlelight in your later years, you're not just tired, you're haunted. By the things you built, the people you used, the hours wasted on rituals designed to hide the simple fact that you were, at your core, just a man who hated being alone. When you die, your funeral is lavish, of course. Versailles wears mourning silk. Your mistresses weep in calculated unison. The court immediately begins pretending you weren't the entire gravitational centre of its world. But you were. You still are. To this day, Versailles remains part museum, part ghost story. Tourists walk the same halls where you whispered sweet nothings and state secrets. Your bed, absurdly ornate, still stands in your private chamber. Not quite throne, not quite altar, but something in between. The Sun King ruled from that bed, and when you dream tonight, don't be surprised if you hear the rustle of brocade and the low hum of scandal. Because in some shimmering corner of history, Louis is still watching, still reclining, still deciding who gets to stay, and who will vanish when the curtains close. The room smells like politics, sandalwood, fresh ink, powdered wigs, and just the faintest trace of something sour beneath it all. Gossip. You stand perfectly composed, not a strand of powdered hair out of place, a corset pulled so tight it could hold up a fortress wall. And yet your eyes gleam with fire. You are Catherine II of Russia, Catherine the Great. And if one more man dares imply that your power comes from your lovers, you might just have him flogged, exiled, or turned into a throw rug. Let's get this out of the way. No, you did not have sex with a horse. The infamous legend, which claims you died crushed beneath an amorous stallion, is entirely fictional. The logistics alone are absurd. But the fact that the rumour has survived for over 2 centuries says more about your enemies than it does about you. They couldn't beat you at diplomacy, war, or reform, so they attacked your bedroom. The idea that a powerful woman might also have a sexual appetite? Unforgivable. She must be perverse, insatiable, mad. Certainly no real empress could govern and desire in equal measure. Cue the horse. But back to reality, where your lovers were very, very real, and mostly human. You had a system, organised and deliberate. You didn't just fling yourself at handsome courtiers like a lovesick duchess. You evaluated candidates, had them vetted. Some were tested in ways. Sometimes you gave them minor positions in the court first to observe them. If they bored you, they were promoted elsewhere. If they intrigued you, they became the next official favourite. Yes, that's what you called them. Your favourites, lovers with titles, estates, influence. Some lasted weeks, some years, but you remained in control, always. You weren't a fool falling into bed with poets. You were selecting companions the same way you selected ministers, for usefulness, intelligence, and, okay, fine, excellent cheekbones. Your most famous favourite was Grigory Potemkin. He was everything, your lover, your advisor, your co-sovereign in all but name. You never officially married him, but there's evidence you had a secret ceremony. You ruled together, wrote each other letters so steamy they'd fog up any powdered window pane, and trusted each other with matters of both state and heart. Even after your physical relationship cooled, he remained your most loyal ally. You gave him Crimea, he gave you peace of mind. That's romance, imperial edition. Then there was Alexander Lanskoy, your boyish delight. Tender, artistic, tragically short-lived. After his death you wept like a woman undone. Others followed. Zubov the young. Ambitious officer with a bit too much swagger. Rimsky-Korsakov, a singer whose voice moved you to tears until he slept with someone else. And then you moved him to Siberia. Swiftly. Your tastes were eclectic. Not always the most handsome, but always the most intriguing. You liked them young, yes, but you weren't a predator. You were powerful, unapologetically feminine, and surrounded by sycophants who would have licked the mud off your boots if it meant a week in your bedchamber. You gave affection, gifts, titles, and when you tired of someone, you gave them land and a polite farewell. You were an empress, not a monster. Now, let's talk palace logistics. The Winter Palace, with its gilded ceilings and frosted windows, was not exactly a subtle setting for late-night affairs. So you had tunnels, private corridors, rooms where only select guards were allowed to linger. There were codes, fan signals, candle placements, particular perfume scents wafting through the hallway at specific hours. Your nighttime visitors didn't knock, they were expected. Your bedchamber was famously cosy by royal standards. Velvet, yes. Gold, of course, but not ostentatious. You liked warmth, music, books. You were a voracious reader. Voltaire was your long-distance intellectual flirtation, and often kept a book beside the bed. Sometimes, too, your lovers didn't just warm your sheets, they had to stimulate your mind. If they couldn't hold a conversation after dinner, they wouldn't last until dessert. And here's a quirky detail from your domestic life. You adored little lapdogs and kept several Pomeranians around your chambers at all times. One famously bit a visiting ambassador, and rather than apologise, you declared the dog had better instincts than most diplomats. The ambassador laughed. You didn't. Now, here's the scholarly dilemma. How do you separate Catherine the Great, the reformer, the lawmaker, the brilliant strategist, from Catherine the lover? You can't. And that's what makes you fascinating. You weren't just the woman who expanded the Russian Empire, embraced the Enlightenment, and corresponded with the greatest minds of Europe. You were also a woman with desire, and you didn't hide it. Some historians still can't forgive you for that. They call your lovers corrupting influences. They blame them for policy missteps. Others take the opposite view, arguing that these relationships were the rare spaces where you could be human, vulnerable, even reared that loving made you more effective, not less. But most agree on this. You owned your sexuality in a way that no other empress had dared. You wielded it like a scepter, not to manipulate, but to express, to explore, to enjoy. And why shouldn't you? You outmaneuvered a court that wanted to crush you, took a throne they said you didn't deserve, defeated rivals, modernized Russia, and in between all that, you took lovers, because you could. Your death came quietly. No horses, no scandal, just a stroke in your dressing room after a morning of state papers and light conversation. You were buried in the Peter and Paul Cathedral alongside the husband you overthrew, but the real love stories, the ones that mattered, are whispered through the old halls of the Winter Palace, carried on the perfume of dried roses and half-burnt letters. Catherine the Great, woman, empress, lover, legend. They still can't decide whether to admire you or fear you, which means you did it right. The room is dark, not from lack of torches, but because you prefer it that way. Shadows crawl up the walls like vines, curling into the corners, swallowing the tapestries. You sit cross-legged on a bearskin rug, fingers tapping rhythmically against your knees, surrounded by attendants so thick it could be cut with a knife. You are Ivan IV, better known as Ivan the Terrible, Tsar of all Rus, first crowned emperor of Russia, and possibly the worst man alive to disappoint in bed, or worse, betray in marriage. This is not romance. This is possession. Your love life is not a tale of silk sheets and slow dances. It's fire, bruised lips, unsolicited tears. Your wives, and there are many, are not your partners. They are emblems, pieces on a chessboard, reshuffled, discarded, or destroyed depending on how the night or your nerves go. You married your first wife, Anastasia Romanovna, for love, or something close to it. She was graceful, gentle, and perhaps the only woman who ever softened the coiled serpent of your temper. With her, you were almost kind. Almost. You called her your dove. You let her finish sentences. You let her see the man beneath the armour. The boy who'd watched his mother die of poison and his court tear itself apart. And then she died. Poisoned, you believed. Your grief wasn't mourning, it was combustion. You accused the boyars, the nobles, the cooks, the flies on the windowsill. You unleashed your wrath with a cruelty no poet could romanticize. Torture, exile, executions. Whole families wiped out because one woman's absence cracked the dam inside you. The man who might have loved, gone. Replaced by a beast in a crown, you marry again and again and again, officially 8 times. Unofficially. Who's counting? The Orthodox Church certainly was. They disapproved after the 3rd. You ignored them. You were the Tsar, God's anointed. If you wanted to marry a milkmaid from Novgorod or a widow whose husband vanished suspiciously last Tuesday, you did it. And you did. Some of your wives lived. Some vanished. Others died mysteriously. Fevers, falls, a sudden loss of favour that ended in a quiet burial and a loud silence. You'd marry them in white and bury them in rumours. Your palace became a revolving door of bridal processions and funerals. No one ever knew how long a woman would last, least of all the women. Here's a strange true story. After the death of one wife, you held a literal bride show. A parade of hundreds of eligible young women from across the empire dressed in their finest, made to line up before you like livestock at market. You walked among them, touching chins, examining teeth, asking obscure questions about theology or whether they like dogs. You chose a teenager. She lasted a year, maybe. You also believed your wives could bring you spiritual protection or curses. If one fell ill, you suspected witchcraft. If one looked at you the wrong way during dinner, you had her watched. If she contradicted you, she'd better have her burial shroud ready. Once you accused a wife of infertility and had her sent to a convent in disgrace. Another was beaten for allegedly gossiping about your breath. You were paranoid, erratic, cruel, but not stupid. You used marriage to manipulate alliances. You wed foreign princesses when it suited you, sent emissaries with gifts of gold and wolf pelts, only to annul the union if your bride offended you by chewing too loudly. You were once in talks to marry Queen Elizabeth I seriously. She declined, citing distance and temperamental incompatibility, which was a polite way of saying you terrify me, and also you probably smell like iron and rage. But amidst the wreckage, you still wanted love, or what you thought was love. You wanted someone to look at you and not flinch, to reach for your hand and not fear the sword at your belt. You wanted warmth, but every time someone got close, the storm inside you snapped its jaws. And the most infamous moment of your rage? Not with a wife, but your own son. You'd grown suspicious of him, or maybe jealous, or maybe it was one of your wives he insulted. Historians argue. But what's agreed upon is this. In a fit of rage, you struck him, hard, with your staff. Blood bloomed on his temple. He collapsed. You knelt beside him, sobbing, cradling his body, whispering apologies as the life drained from his eyes. A fresco survives, painted years later, of you holding him, wide-eyed, haunted, the only time the world saw you look human. Your lovers, if they can be called that, left no love letters, no poetry, and no portraits painted with longing glances or hands resting on hearts. They left rumours, whispers. Some said you kept certain favourites hidden in private chambers, where they lived in velvet and fear. Others said you drank aphrodisiacs made of deer blood and crushed opium, that you believed sex could prolong your life or shorten someone else's depending on how you used it. And the scholarly debate? It's murky. Some argue you were simply a product of your time, raised amid chaos, used marriage as a tool like every other monarch, and kept concubines as any ruler might. Others say no, you were something different. That your relationships weren't about affection or alliance, but control, that you loved the feeling of owning someone, that you loved watching love die in their eyes. But even monsters have echoes of humanity. There are quiet accounts, very few but enough, that you wept after one of your wives miscarried, that you kept a lock of Anastasia's hair in a wooden box beside your bed, that sometimes in winter you would sit by the window and whisper prayers to a god who hadn't answered in years. You died as you lived, mid-gesture, unpredictable, sudden. One moment you were playing chess, laughing. The next your body collapsed onto the board, scattering pieces like bones in the snow. No one wept too loudly, too dangerous. Today the women you married are mostly forgotten, their names buried in footnotes, their lives measured in how long they lasted. But the myth of you? It endures. A czar who married as if each union was a dare to fate, who loved like a hammer falling, who wanted connection but couldn't unclench his fist long enough to receive it. And somewhere in the echo of palace halls long gone, your voice still lingers. Not shouting, not weeping, just calling a name no one remembers, hoping she'll answer. The scent of pine smoke drifts through the frosted air, mingling with the sharp tang of vodka and sweat as laughter echoes down a torchlit corridor. You're staggering, but with purpose, half-dressed, fully amused, and dragging a man in a powdered wig by his ankle while singing a half-remembered drinking song. You are Peter the Great, Tsar of Russia, future emperor, builder of cities, breaker of noses, an absolute menace to anyone hoping for a quiet, well-behaved royal court. You were never going to rule like a normal monarch. The moment you took the throne, it was clear. You weren't interested in the powdered, pious image of previous Tsars. No. You were going to shake Russia until the snow came loose, And if that meant dragging your court through a centuries-late puberty, complete with forced beard shaving, Western dress codes, and sexually unhinged cultural exchanges, so be it. But behind the political reforms, the shipbuilding, and the gleaming skeleton of St. Petersburg rising from the swamps, you had another passion: partying. Not just drinking, but ritualized debauchery. And the centre of this passion? The all-joking, all-drunken synod of fools and jesters. Yes, that was a real thing. You created a fake church dedicated to wine, women, mock sermons, and gloriously obscene rituals. The priests wore inverted crosses and robes stolen from real monasteries. There were mock baptisms in vodka. Confessions were shouted across banquet tables. Your closest friends were given ranks based on their drinking prowess, dirty jokes, or ability to perform spontaneous erotic charades. You didn't just blur the line between sacred and profane, you lit it on fire and danced on the ashes. Your favourite member of this synod was Prince Alexander Menshikov, your best friend and possibly more. Historians dance carefully around the nature of your relationship, but the closeness between you two, both strategic and emotional, was undeniable. You called him Sasha. You shared everything: victories, secrets, political plans, and occasionally lovers. You built him a palace, raised him from a common soldier to one of the most powerful men in Russia, and allowed him, frequently, to see you in every state from battle-ready to blackout. And then there was your wife, Catherine. Not Catherine I, your arranged bride from noble stock, but Catherine the former laundry maid, the woman you met during your military campaigns, possibly in the wreckage of a seized town. Depending on which version of the story you believe, she was uneducated, plain, and utterly unfazed by your theatrics. She cooked for you, swore at you, cleaned up your vomit after you'd lost a drinking contest to a German ambassador. She once tackled you during a drunken brawl to keep you from killing one of your own men. You fell in love instantly. You didn't marry her publicly for years, but she was always by your side. During battles, in the palace, in bed. She gave you children, advice, and perhaps most importantly, patience. When your rage boiled over, she calmed it. When your libido tangled itself in scandal, she unknotted it with a shrug. You eventually made her empress, the first woman to rule Russia in her own right. Not because she was beautiful or noble or politically necessary, but because she was the only person who could actually handle you. But let's not pretend you were monogamous. Your palace was a playground. You kept mistresses across Europe, French actresses, Prussian nobles, Swedish diplomats' wives. You had a fondness for tall women, strong arms, sharp wits. You liked them loud, preferably drunk, and preferably willing to wrestle you before bed. One ambassador wrote that your court was equal parts brothel, saloon, and naval academy. You took it as a compliment. And here's a wild little fringe fact. You were fascinated by giants, literally. You collected tall people, forming a special Preobrazhensky regiment made almost entirely of towering men and women. You'd parade them around the palace, occasionally dressing them in drag, or forcing them to perform plays you wrote while wearing oversized powdered wigs and not much else. One of your favourites, a 7-foot soldier named Fyodor, was reportedly made to impersonate you at parties, including in your bed. You also kept a museum of oddities, which, aside from pickled animal fetuses and medical anomalies, included erotic art from across the globe. You displayed it next to your dental tools. Yes, you also practiced dentistry on your courtiers, often while drunk. The scholarly debate over your sex life is part confusion, part resignation. Some paint you as a chaotic bisexual hedonist, others as a heterosexual alpha with occasional homoerotic theatrics. A few suggest you simply used sex the way you used war, as performance. A way to shock, to dominate, to stay in control by appearing utterly out of it. And yet, there was tenderness. With Catherine, there were nights you asked for lullabies instead of wine. Nights you left parties early to sit with her by the fire and let her comb your hair. You wrote her notes in bad grammar, decorated with obscene doodles and lipstick prints, yours. When she was ill, you refused to eat. When she travelled, you sent letters daily, sometimes with pressed flowers, sometimes with dirty jokes written in invisible ink. You ruled with an iron fist and a drunk hug. You built a navy and a whiskey fountain in the same year. You forced Russia to stand up straight while slouching into bed with lovers who didn't know whether to laugh or flee. You were terrifying, irresistible, impossible. Your death was as dramatic as your life. You fell ill after jumping into freezing water to save drowning sailors. You refused treatment. You wrote jokes on your deathbed. You called for Catherine. You made her your successor. And then you slipped away like a man who'd already done too much. You left behind a legacy carved in Baltic stone and engraved in every scandalous memoir across Europe. The city of St. Petersburg, your greatest masterpiece, still stands. So do the stories of a Saab Tsar who ruled from bar stools and battlefield tents, who kissed his wife with gunpowder on his lips and demanded orgies end with state decrees. You were Peter the Great, and your love life? Loud, lavish, unapologetically legendary. You're alone in a battlefield tent lit by flickering candlelight, quill in hand, eyes half blurred from exhaustion. And what are you writing? A military strategy, an imperial directive? No, you're writing yet another letter to Josephine. You are Napoleon Bonaparte, Emperor of the French, master of Europe, and possibly the most passionate, insecure, and frequently horny man to ever ride a horse into a revolution. Your love life? It's not so much a romantic saga as it is a cannonball ricocheting between obsession, conquest, and heartbreak, and way too many colognes. Let's start with Josephine. Josephine. You meet her in Paris. She's older, elegant, worldly, and everything you think a sophisticated lover should be. She's also recently widowed, in debt, and mostly tolerating you at first. But you fall hard. You write letters, almost daily. Wild, needy, dramatic letters where you call her your little Josephine and beg her not to bathe because you want to smell her exactly as she is upon return, which frankly is a level of specific kink no one was prepared for. Don't wash, you write. I am coming. Yes, Napoleon, we know, she doesn't exactly return your fire, at least not in the beginning. While you're out on campaign, she's busy flirting with army officers and hosting salon parties. You hear the rumours, you feel humiliated, and then something in you snaps. The obsessive love cools into cold-blooded strategy. You take lovers of your own, plenty of them. You send messages to court-arranging discreet liaisons, actresses, courtesans, married women, anyone who smells the right combination of French perfume and political advantage. But Josephine still lingers. She's your empress now, crowned beside you in Notre Dame. You even crown her yourself, taking the crown from the Pope's hands and placing it on her head like some mythic Roman war bride. It's romantic, it's powerful, it's propaganda, and yet it doesn't last, because she cannot give you what you want most, an heir. And so, with heartbreak masked as duty, you divorce her. It's public, painful, tearful, you cry. She cries. The court pretends not to cry. You give her a title, a castle, a pension. She leaves as an empress and remains, in your heart, something even more powerful, the one. But you must marry again, for France, for legacy. Enter Marie-Louise of Austria. Young, royal, fertile. Everything Josephine wasn't, and yet not Josephine. You marry her anyway. She gives you a son, the King of Rome. Healthy, beautiful boy you dote on with something like desperation, hoping he'll solidify your new dynasty. Spoiler alert, he won't. Your sex life with Marie-Louise is described politely as dutiful. She's terrified of you at first. You're twice her age and your idea of foreplay is quoting Caesar and showing off military maps. But she grows to accept you, even love you perhaps, in a distant, Habsburg-approved way. You try to be gentle. You even brush her hair. But you never let her near the vulnerable parts of you, not like Josephine. Meanwhile, you keep your side affairs going. You once famously said, "A man in love is a slave, that is why I have no lovers," which is hilarious given your track record. You had many lovers, and most of them were not discreet. You liked your women refined, clever, and, when possible, unavailable. Courtesans especially. You found their theatricality soothing. They understood performance. You also had a thing for brunettes with sharp tongues, which, yes, says everything about you. There's a lesser-known story about you seducing a young Polish countess while in exile, calling her your Polish star and composing awkward poems about her smile. Another affair with an Italian opera singer was so intense you had her escorted across battlefields just to spend the night. You risked war for a soprano. And then there's the cologne. You were obsessed with it, used bottles of the stuff, particularly Eau de Cologne by Jean-Marie Farina. You soaked your neck, your wrists, your shirts, your letters. People could smell you before they saw you. Some said it was seductive. Others said it was overwhelming. Either way, no one forgot it. And here's a fringe little fact. You were very particular about linens. You carried your own bed sheets on campaign, insisted on silk when possible, and made sure your sleeping quarters were scented, whether in a palace or a battlefield tent. You said it helped you dream. You never said of what. Scholars have wrestled with your love life for centuries. Were you a romantic, manipulative egotist, a tender-hearted conqueror who couldn't separate passion from control? Some say Josephine was the only real emotional relationship you ever had, and everything else was performance. Others argue she was just your first, and your later lovers received more measured, sincere affection. And yet, despite all your power, you were never entirely in control of love. That's the irony. You could redraw maps with a letter, reorganize governments with a raised eyebrow, but you couldn't stop loving someone who didn't love you back the same way. You couldn't stop longing for something softer in a world you'd hardened with cannon fire. You die in exile, on a bleak island far from anyone who ever whispered your name with heat. No silk sheets, no perfume notes, just memories. Fading, distant. You keep Josephine's portrait by your bed until the end. You mention her with your last breath, and even your enemies admit it wasn't France or glory or empire you longed for in that final moment. It was her. And tonight, as we look back on all your battles, victory and lovers, what remains is not the empire, but the letters, the longing, the contradiction of a man who ruled the world but could never quite master his own heart. The marble is cool beneath your bare feet, the air heavy with the scent of jasmine and something more pungent, decay perhaps, or power long unwashed. You glide through your palace in silence, your silken robes whispering across the floor as you pass guards who pretend not to glance up. You are Caliph Harun al-Rashid, ruler of the Abbasid Caliphate, golden child of Islam's golden age, and the closest thing the ancient world had to a celebrity monarch. If the tales are to be believed, your bedroom was as opulent and complex as the architecture of your libraries, and far more frequently visited. This is the age of 1001 Nights, and whether or not Scheherazade was a real person, she speaks in the cadence of your court. Your palace is Baghdad, at its peak, gleaming, overflowing with scholars, poets, astrologers, and yes, women. Many, many women. Your harem is not just a collection of concubines, it's an ecosystem. A political force, a universe within your walls. You have inherited not just a tradition, but an empire that understands pleasure not as weakness, but as sophistication. The women in your harem come from across the known world. Byzantine princesses, Persian singers, Circassian dancers, African poets. Some were gifts from foreign rulers, others tributes, others purchased in the markets of Basra and Samarkand. Each one chosen not just for beauty, but for something else: wit, talent, presence. And you are their sun, their axis, their mystery. Sometimes you walk among them in disguise. You love disguises. At night, you often slip out of the palace altogether, dressed as a merchant or a scholar, to observe the real pulse of Baghdad. But inside your own walls, you wear veils and robes and let yourself be the audience. You enjoy being entertained, flattered, teased. You don't dominate your harem, you let it orbit you, slowly, luxuriously. There's Zubaydah, your cousin and wife, the first lady of the caliphate, famous for her piety, intelligence and obsession with order. She personally oversaw the construction of wells and resting places for pilgrims on the road to Mecca. You respected her deeply, admired her mind, but your heart wandered, consistently, yet unapologetically, toward the women of the harem, where the perfume was thicker, the conversation lighter, and the rules less binding. Your favourite concubines, the ones history has tried to pin down, remain mostly shadows. There was Merida, perhaps, or Shuhda, both mentioned in passing as singer-slaves who stole your attention and held it for seasons. Some say you loved a harpist who composed lullabies just for you. Others say your most trusted lover was a woman who refused to speak except in riddles, and made you laugh so hard you rewrote her manumission papers while still naked. And let's not pretend this was all candlelight and poetry, or so. Your harem was a court of ambition. Women jockeyed for your favour like generals in a battlefield of silk and coal. Ulysses ran deep. Spies were everywhere. Poison was not unheard of. A favourite today could be exiled tomorrow. You set the tone, sometimes indulgent, sometimes cruel. You gave pet names, then revoked them. You gifted rubies, then issued silent dismissals. Power in your world was as erotic as flesh. But it wasn't all conquest. You truly appreciated art. You memorised lines of love poetry and recited them after sex, while lounging in robes and sipping rosewater. You once gifted a concubine an entire orchard simply because she compared your lips to pomegranate seeds in a poem. Another, who dared to outsing your favourite bard, was rewarded with her own garden, eunuch attendants, and a private poet to write verses in her honour. You kept records of your dreams, shared them with your lovers, debated the interpretations with astrologers. Sometimes you rearranged the order of your bedfellows based on omens, who saw which bird, who stepped into a sunbeam first. You once postponed a tryst because your concubine sneezed 3 times while entering the room, which, according to your chief dream interpreter, was a sign of temporary divine disfavour. The concubine wept. You sent her golden slippers by way of apology. Here's a lesser-known, wonderfully bizarre detail. You had a mechanical servant, possibly one of the first examples of a programmable device, who could pour wine into cups. It was designed by your court engineer, and you loved using it during intimate gatherings. You would tap the base, and the automaton would glide forward, pour the wine, and retreat, all without spilling a drop. It impressed your guests, it terrified your lovers. And then there's the scholarly mess of trying to determine how much of this is true. Are you the libertine of legend, the caliph who hosted endless orgies, or the pious patron who prayed 5 times a day and discussed theology with his concubines between sessions? Depends who you ask. Some historians insist the tales of your nightly escapades are exaggerated, even fabricated, by later storytellers. Others point to records, poems, and even tax documents that suggest your palace overflowed not just with books and scholars, but silk beds and too many pillows. The truth, of course, is somewhere in between. You were many things: a warrior, a poet, a deeply religious man with a taste for luxury so deep it would make Nero blush. You built hospitals, patronised artists, and debated theology with scholars, while a concubine massaged your feet. You led armies by day and snuck into courtesans' rooms by night. Your harem was not just about sex, it was about presence, about courtly games, about being witnessed. When you die, the court goes into mourning. Zubaydah weeps behind her veil. The poets write long, flowery elegies comparing you to the setting sun, the fallen moon. The women of your harem, those still alive, scatter. Some are married off, some return to their families, others vanish into history's fragrant silence. And yet, in the backrooms of Baghdad, in the poetry passed from hand to hand, your legend lives on. The great Harun al-Rashid, who once reclined on cushions and called for a song, then rewrote the destiny of an empire with a kiss and a decree. You weren't just a ruler. You were the story. The walls of the villa are painted in soft reds and golds, warmed by the Mediterranean sun and filled with the scent of roasted figs, olive oil, and something a little stronger. Power, maybe, or lust disguised as leisure. You recline on a carved wooden couch, one sandal dangling from your foot, watching as 2 slaves fan the air lazily around you. You are Emperor Tiberius, second ruler of the Roman Empire, successor to Augustus, and one of the most controversial figures ever to wear the laurel crown. Not because of your conquests or politics, though those had their moments, but because of what you did once the doors closed and the curtains were drawn. Your sex life isn't just scandalous, it's infamous. It's so infamous, in fact, that many historians today still argue over whether you were a monster or merely a misunderstood recluse who became the subject of Rome's most relentless smear campaign. Either way, the stories are vivid, and you? You make Caligula look like a Catholic schoolboy on his best behaviour. But let's rewind. You didn't start out depraved, you started out reluctant. You never wanted to be emperor. You were a soldier, a strategist, a man of rigid self-discipline, married young to Vipsania, whom you actually loved, deeply by all accounts. She was gentle, intelligent, unambitious, the only woman who made you feel sane in a family obsessed with image and manipulation. But Augustus forced you to divorce her, in a cold move of dynastic chess, and marry his own daughter, Julia. Julia, who was your opposite in every way, flamboyant, adulterous, wild. She mocked you in public, surrounded herself with lovers, and humiliated you in ways even the Senate whispered about. You were miserable, broken, and something inside you curled up and died. When Augustus finally passed and left the empire in your hands, you accepted the title with a sigh instead of a cheer. You ruled Rome with a mixture of quiet competence and increasing bitterness. And slowly, as the years passed, you withdrew, first from politics, then from Rome itself, retreating to the island of Capri and building what would become your most enduring legacy, the Villa Jovis. It's here on the sun-drenched cliffs, far from the marble forums and sycophants of the capital, that you transformed. The emperor of self-restraint became the emperor of excess. The story is mostly told by the historian Suetonius, who was not above gossip, claimed that your villa was less a royal residence and more a pleasure palace of mind-bending proportions. You surrounded yourself with young boys and girls, many taken as tribute or tribute-shaped gifts from noble families. You trained them as minnows, the story goes, to swim between your legs in your private pool and perform acts so perverse the Latin doesn't even bother euphemizing them. There are accounts of you having manuals created detailing exotic positions, strange rituals and horrifyingly specific requirements for your partners. You built rooms with revolving beds, mirrors on every wall, gardens filled with statuary posed in erotic positions to inspire new pleasures. There were tunnels and passageways where slaves would sneak in and out to avoid scandal, though scandal by this point was the whole point. One famous story claims you kept a chamber filled with pornography collected from across the empire. When senators visited, you'd force them to tour it, daring them to keep a straight face. Most didn't. Now here's the million denarius question. Were you really that depraved? Maybe, maybe not. Some scholars argue that you were the victim of political propaganda, demonized by those who resented your reclusiveness, your refusal to play the game. That your successor, Caligula, actively stoked the rumours to justify his own rise. That the Senate, cut off from power and angry about your retreat to Capri, created monstrous tales to delegitimize your legacy. Others point to the sheer volume of stories, the consistency of detail, and suggest, where there's smoke, there's orgies. But even if the most salacious details were exaggerated, there's no denying you became increasingly erratic. You trusted no one, executed advisors on suspicion alone, had spies planted everywhere, even among your servants. You'd once been disciplined to the point of rigidity. Now you were paranoid, indulgent, and at times flat-out cruel. And the sex, whether exaggerated or not, it became central to how Rome saw you. You weren't seducing senators' wives or falling tragically in love like earlier emperors. You were consuming people, boys, girls, slaves. You took what you wanted, and when you were done, you sent them back with coins or wounds. Some were honoured to serve you, others were terrified. You didn't care. That part of you, the part that once loved Vipsania, was long gone. But here's a strange little detail, often overlooked. You wrote poetry. Melancholy, lonely verses about the sea, about freedom, about guilt. They were never meant for public reading. A few fragments survive, scratched into wax tablets, or hidden in forgotten scrolls. One, addressed to no one in particular, simply reads, "Even the waves recoil from me now." Was it remorse? Was it madness? We don't know. What we do know is that you died in isolation. Some say you were smothered with a pillow by your own successor. Others claim you died of natural causes while watching the sunset. Either way, the empire barely paused. Caligula took the throne and immediately outdid you in spectacle and cruelty. But the rumours about you persisted. And today, when people mention your name, it's usually with a raised eyebrow and a half smile. The emperor who ruled with silence but made the loudest kind of scandal. The man who once commanded the legions of Rome but couldn't command the ghosts in his own mind. Your lovers, most remain nameless, forgotten, treated as playthings, shadows in the corners of candlelit rooms. But in the myths and rumours, true or not, they're still swimming in those marble pools, still echoing through the halls of the Village Ovis, still whispering warnings to anyone who thinks that power and pleasure are the same thing. Tiberius, the reluctant emperor, the exiled heart, the man who fled Rome and built a prison out of paradise. The scent of incense clings to the walls, thick and bitter, masking the rot that no amount of perfume can truly hide. Velvet drapes shiver in the stale air, pulled across stained windows as if to protect the world outside from whatever is happening in here. You are Elagabalus, Emperor of Rome, crowned at 14, dead by 18, and possibly the most sexually confusing, extravagantly scandalous ruler to ever make the Senate collectively wish for a meteor strike. And that's saying something. Let's not pretend you came into this job with stability in mind. You were thrust onto the imperial stage in 218 CE, a teenage high priest of a Syrian sun god, Elagabal, hence the nickname, riding into Rome with a crown, a smile, and absolutely zero intention of playing by the rules. You weren't interested in military campaigns or diplomacy or tax reform. You were interested in silk gods, gender, and the exact boundaries of Roman decency, and how to cross all of them at once. First things first, your personal god. You imported a giant black meteorite from Emesa and declared it a living deity. You renamed temples. You forced Rome, to worship a chunk of cosmic rock wearing gold robes. You made senators attend rituals where oxen were sacrificed while drums thundered, and Eucus and you, half naked in glittering robes, danced around the altar covered in saffron oil. This was not just religious devotion, this was performance art. Pagan drag opera at an imperial level. But your divine obsessions didn't stop at theology. They bled directly into your sex life. Your bed was not a private place. It was a rotating stage, a festival, a chaotic carousel. Men, women, eunuchs, priests, slaves, actors, gladiators, often several at once. You didn't just blur gender roles, you napalmed them. You wore makeup, spoke in a soft voice, dressed in women's clothing for public ceremonies, insisted on being addressed as lady, empress, or, most famously, the bride. You declared your intention to marry a male charioteer named Hierocles, calling him your husband and giving him titles once reserved for noblemen. In another twist, you also reportedly married a well-endowed gladiator named Zoticus, whom you scouted personally after hearing rumours of his divine proportions. And you didn't stop at marriage. You paid vast sums of money to doctors across the empire, inquiring about the possibility of surgical gender reassignment, something that sparked massive scholarly debate ever since. Did you actually request procedures to be made into a woman? Or was this ancient slander passed down by Roman historians who couldn't grasp queerness without framing it as deviance? Either way, it's there, in the record, alongside stories of you offering gold to anyone who could give you a vagina, which brings us to the infamous sex lottery. According to Cassius Dio, and again grain of salt here, you installed yourself in a brothel, standing behind a curtain, offering your services to paying men as if you were just another prostitute. Not because you needed money, because you liked it. You wanted to be desired, to be chosen, to play with power by surrendering it. Some say it was performance, others say it was addiction. A few argue so it was something close to spiritual ecstasy. And your actual wives, you had at least 5, mostly for show. You married the Vestal Virgin Aquilia Severa, an act that was both illegal and sacrilegious, and then divorced her, only to remarry her again, claiming it was a symbolic union of priest and goddess. It was chaos with a wedding veil. You were less interested in love and more obsessed with sacred unions, divine gender balance, and poking every taboo with a golden stick. Here's a strange, delicious detail. It said you threw dinner parties where the seating was based on sexual experience. Virgins sat at one end, those who'd seen everything sat at the other. You once replaced guests' food with wax replicas, or gave them meals entirely made of beans just to see who would maintain their dignity while farting through dessert. You filled fountains with wine, released wild animals into your banquets, and once served peas laced with tiny pearls, daring guests to eat them anyway. So what's the scholarly consensus? Well, there isn't one. You are one of history's most hotly debated emperors. Some argue that later Roman historians, especially the Historia Augusta, exaggerated or outright fabricated tales to discredit you. That your queerness, your rejection of traditional masculinity, made you a prime target for character assassination. That you were a flamboyant young ruler crushed by an empire that couldn't tolerate fluidity. Others say, no, you really were that wild. That you made the imperial palace into a palace of pleasure. That you confused sex with governance and identity with theatre. That you didn't care whether your actions made sense, only that they were memorable. And by that metric, you succeeded spectacularly. But let's not skip over the tragedy, because beneath the spectacle you were a teenager, a kid handed absolute power, worshipped by fanatics, manipulated by family and left to rule an empire that was already on the edge. You were crowned too young, exposed too early and devoured too quickly by your own appetites and the empire's need for conformity. You died violently, as most Rome emperors did. Strangled by your own soldiers, your body was thrown into the Tiber, your name erased from monuments, your reign, which lasted barely 4 years, was declared a disgrace. But you endure, in whispers, in footnotes, in queer history forums and revisionist scholarship, as a gender-bending ruler who defied the binary, as an erotic anarchist, as a tragic icon, as a cautionary tale, or maybe a secret hero. The line between sinner and symbol is thin, and you walked it in high heels with eyeliner on. Today, when people tell tales of Elagabalus, they often start with disbelief, the orgies, the gender-fluid deity, the holy marriage to a god rock, but they end with a strange sense of awe. Because whether you were a monster, a martyr, or just a misunderstood teen with too much power and not enough boundaries, you made your mark. And you did it with style. The candle gutters softly in its bronze sconce, casting your shadow to in long, distorted shapes across the scroll-strewn table. You sit hunched over, reading dispatches from a dozen provinces, weighing rebellions against harvests, bureaucratic appointments against the placement of your next concubine. You are Emperor Wu of Han Wudi, the long-reigning sovereign of China's Han Dynasty, builder of roads, breaker of borders, and, privately, a man whose bedroom life could easily be mistaken for a full-time military campaign. With slightly more poetry, you've ruled for decades, your name will become legend, the Martial Emperor. You'll open up the Silk Road, expand the empire farther than anyone imagined, and fight wars on so many fronts that historians will need maps the size of scrolls just to keep up. But here, now, inside the shadowed halls of your inner palace, your legacy isn't carved into stone or painted on temple walls, it's curled up beside you, or slipping out of your bedchamber, or brushing a strand of hair behind her ear while pretending she isn't wondering if she'll live to see sunrise. Your imperial harem is massive, not dozens, hundreds, technically thousands. You don't just have concubines, you have categories, rankings, subcastes. Titles like ladies in attendance, beauties of the second rank, and women awaiting orders. It's less a household and more a low-level government department dedicated to pleasure, carefully regulated, obsessively documented, and emotionally combustible. And at the very centre of it all, you weren't always like this. Early in your reign, you married Empress Chen, a politically arranged union meant to unite powerful families. She was elegant, poised, and unfortunately, completely uninteresting to you. No children came, no spark, and so your gaze wandered. Your officials looked away, and then came Wei Zifu, a singer, a low-born palace entertainer. You heard her voice, asked her name, summoned her once, and then again, and again. She was humble, sharp-eyed, and not at all prepared to become the obsession of an emperor. You raised her from nothing to imperial glory, made her your concubine, then your consort. Then, after years and a long, calculated removal of Empress Chen, your new empress, she gave you a son, a dynasty, but power is a hydra. With every head you cut off, another grew. Wei Zifu's brother became a general. Her family grew rich, but so did the Whispers. Your other concubines, some jealous, some political pawns, plotted against her. There were rumours of witchcraft, of curses buried in walls, of dolls stuck with needles in her name. You believed some of it. You were superstitious, deeply so. One fortune teller told you your fate would be undone by a woman. That prophecy lived in your bones, and it didn't help that you were aging, and they weren't. You continued to take concubines, young ones, many of them teenagers. You once selected 2,000 women from across the empire in a single recruitment, sorted by age, family status, artistic skill, and yes, physical measurements. They were tested on musical talent, etiquette, and unofficially, their ability to keep your attention past the second hour of conversation. Some succeeded, briefly, others spent decades in the harem without ever once seeing your face. There's a particularly strange case that still fascinates scholars. Lady Lai, a fierce, beautiful woman who gave birth to a favoured son, then tried to manipulate court politics in his favour. She overstepped. You turned cold. When she insulted your new favourite concubine, you had her imprisoned. Her son was executed. She died alone, raging against the walls, insisting you'd once promised her everything. You probably had. And here's one of those weird fringe details. In your later years, you became obsessed with Taoist immortality rituals. Specifically the idea that sleeping with virgins could prolong your life, not sex, mind you, but the transfer of essence. So you'd have them brought to you, terrified, unprepared, instructed to simply lie beside you and breathe in harmony. Some say you practiced a form of tantric abstinence. Others say you gave up and reverted to the usual routine after about 5 minutes. The point is, you wanted to live forever, not just for power, for pleasure. Because the palace wasn't just an extension of the state, it was your world. And your women, they were its stars, moons, and meteor storms. You had them trained in dance, poetry, medicine. One concubine invented a hairpin design still worn today. Another wrote poems that ended up in your private collection, the margins annotated with your own half-thoughts. She sees too much, you once scribbled beside a line. And maybe she did, but not everyone was playing for love. Some used their proximity to you to push their clans upward. Others used it to secure their safety. After all, the closer you were to the dragon, the harder it was to be eaten by someone else. Your harem became a battlefield, not of swords, but of words, glances, rumours, tears. You were both emperor and judge, god and ghost, depending on which room you walked into, and scholars still argue over it all. Some portray you as a lust-driven egomaniac with too many women and not enough time. Others say you were a man drowning in ceremony and paranoia, clinging to youth the only way you could, through the illusion of touch. And still others, more charitable, describe a ruler who loved deeply but was betrayed just as deeply, by wives, by sons, by fate. In your final years, you became quiet. The court grew cautious, the harem shrank, or perhaps you just stopped visiting. You named your great-grandson heir, and spent your last days surrounded not by lovers, but by astrologers and scribes. One attendant said that your final words were a whispered apology, not to the court, not to history, but to someone unnamed. One of the women, maybe, or all of them. You ruled for 54 years. You built an empire that rivaled any on earth. But your lovers, they left no statues, no shrines, only scrolls, rumours, and fragments of poems tucked inside a box under your bed. Lines about moonlight, songbirds, and the fleeting sweetness of someone lying just close enough to hear your breath. You were Emperor Wu of Han, and your bed was a throne all its own. So here we are, at the edge of the imperial bed. Sheets rumpled, candles guttered, echoes of moans, power plays and whispered regrets still hanging like smoke in the air. After 25 tangled tales of emperors and empresses who ruled not just with crowns but with cravings, you might be wondering what all of this meant. Was it just gossip, velvet-draped scandal and ancient thirst? Or was there something else threading it all together? Here's the truth, tucked under the silken ceremony. Power and desire have always been roommates. Uneasy, loud, competitive roommates, throwing furniture and sharing secrets in the middle of the night. These rulers, whether Roman, Chinese, French, or anything in between, didn't just fall into bed. They ruled from it. Their love lives weren't side notes in the margins of history. They were history, inked in lipstick, sealed with blood and embroidered into policy. For some, sex was a weapon. Tiberius turned pleasure into domination, a way to control as much as indulge. For others, like Harun al-Rashid or Catherine the Great, it was a kind of sanctuary, a place where the person could exist outside the crown, even if only briefly. Then there were the tragic ones, like Napoleon, whose passion was epic but always just a little offbeat, or Elagabalus, who blurred lines that the world wasn't ready to smudge. And sure, not all of them were love stories. Some of them were horror stories with good lighting. Let's not romanticize the abuse, the manipulation, the staggering imbalance of power. But let's not deny the humanity either. These emperors didn't want so differently than anyone else. To be desired, to be understood, to be safe in the arms of someone who saw them and not just the crown on their head. In the end, empires crumbled. Thrones were melted, stolen or quietly removed. Names were chiselled off monuments or sung in reverent hymns. But the human heartbeat, that messy, needy, beautifully inconvenient rhythm of longing, kept going, through centuries. Through silk sheets, through the smell of wine and the ache of loneliness at the top of the world. And now you've heard it all. The scandal, the satire, the strange tenderness buried under centuries of politics and perfume. You've wandered palaces and brothels, war camps and sacred chambers, all with the same question. What did they really want? Maybe the answer is simpler than it looks. Maybe what they wanted is what everyone wants. Love, control, distraction, devotion, someone to light the fire and someone to lie beside it. Some got it, most didn't. But oh, did they try? So as you close your eyes tonight, maybe picture it. A silk pillow, a golden goblet half full, a ruler lying in bed, wondering if they're loved for who they are, or what they are, just like anyone else. And hey, if you made it this far, you probably could have survived a night in the harem, or at least made it to breakfast. Sweet dreams, traveller of empires. You've earned your rest.